All right.
We're rolling.
Rolling.
Here we go.
Volley House Podcast, episode 11. We're here at Colca Studios. Call them if you need a firehouse built. They're the #1 commercial builder on Long Island. Also, download the Firewire app, available on iOS and Android. And go to the volleyhousepodcast.com to ask us questions or send in stories or videos you'd like us to review. Also, give us a follow on all social media platforms at Volley House Podcast. Disclaimer. This podcast is intended for a mature audience and contains humor and satire. The views expressed are those of the hosts and guests alone and do not reflect any agency, employer, or organization. While some of the information is educational and factual, other information may be deemed as opinion. Listener discretion advised.
All right. Kevin, how's your mic doing? Is it muted? Because I'm sure it's making a ton of noise if it's not.
Sorry, man.
Oh, right away from my face.
Sorry. It's falling apart,
I'll
bro.
scoot.
This is coming off.
All right.
All right, we'll be all right. If you want, mute it, play with it. So episode 11, this one's a little different than the other ones.
Yep. Chief
Good evening.
Tom Richardson, thank you.
My pleasure.
It's
Thank
an
you for having me.
honor to have you as our
Thank you
first
for
guest.
having me, guys.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Always good to be with new young blood, young firefighters coming up and coming.
I'm old. Sorry.
Well, you look young. You look young.
Kevin's probably muted. He's playing with his mic right now.
It's falling apart.
All right.
It looks better now. You got it more backed on there.
No boy.
That's all right. A little less Kevin audio is okay.
A little less Kevin, a little more Tom. So, Chief, I'd love to get into some of your credentials and stuff like that. We'll hop into some of our ad reads first, and then love to hear all about it.
Great.
So we will start with iCommand Board. Every video we see from a career department incident shows an incident command board on scene. Yet many NIOSH LODD reports a recurring finding is a lack of proper incident command. As a chief in the volunteer fire service, your responsibility is to ensure the safety of everyone operating at every incident. Gone are the days of managing this in your head or in a simple whiteboard. The owner of iCommand Board, a volunteer fire chief, took this challenge head on by developing a professional tool tailored for volunteer fire officers. These command boards are designed with size, affordability, and most importantly, accountability at the forefront. Packed with critical information and checklists, they're built to help you stay organized and focused at every event. Visit iCommandBoard.com today and take the next step in ensuring the safety and success of your department. And when you talk to them, tell them you heard it on the Volley House podcast and get 10% off.
Good stuff.
And also the Fire Store. In the world of firefighting and public safety, reliability is key. That's why for over 2 decades, first responders nationwide have trusted the Fire Store as their go-to source for top-tier equipment, apparel, and accessories. Featuring industry-leading brands like MSA Cairns for helmets, Streamlight for dependable flashlights, and Seek for cutting-edge thermal imaging cameras, the Fire Store equips you with the best tools to tackle any challenge. But it doesn't stop there. From EMS supplies to flame-resistant apparel and high-visibility gear, the Fire Store has everything you need to stay safe and prepared on the job. Partnered with the most trusted names in the industry, the Fire Store is committed to providing quality and innovation because when lives are on the line, there's no room for compromise. Join the thousands of first responders who rely on the Fire Store. Visit firestore.com, your reliable partner for fire and public safety equipment.
Awesome.
Good job.
Got through
You
them.
did that all in one breath?
Tried.
Excellent job.
Chief Richardson,
Yes, sir.
would love to hear about your credentials, you know, where you came from, where you're at currently,
Where
maybe
I'm
some of
going.
the organizations.
going.
Yeah, where you're going.
And did you start off as a volley first before the job?
I
or-
did.
You did.
I
Okay.
I
Great.
did. So I got introduced to the volunteer firehouse through my dad. My dad joined the volunteers 1968. I was 9 years old. I was the oldest of 5, and my dad was a Korean War Marine, tough guy, and he joined the volunteer fire department because we had an incident or a call, an ambulance call on our block, and the gentleman passed away. And this is back 1968, and my dad said, you know what, I'm going to, being a military vet, he said, I want to step up, I want to help the community. So he joined, and he he took to it pretty quickly. My dad worked for Con Edison. He was a lineman for Con Ed,
Okay.
and that's what he did. And he loved it. He loved it. And he quickly went up the ranks. You know, he made lieutenant, I think, 3 years later in the ladder company. And then he was first lieutenant, then he was captain, and then he was assistant chief. So he became an assistant chief in, I think, 1976, third assistant chief. But I was growing up with it, of course. I was 9 when he joined. You know, and then I was going through my teenage years, and when I got into high school, I was playing baseball. You know, and I wasn't as interested in the firehouse as my youngest brother. I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters. My youngest brother was with my father all the time. When there was a call, my youngest brother, Chris, would run out the door with my father, jump in the car, and he would take in all the runs. Me, I was playing baseball, you know, and not really paying attention until I got into about maybe the later part of 10th grade, and 15, 16 years old, I really saw how much my father loved it. He loved going to fire. He loved it. And I said, you know what, maybe there's something to this, you know? And I started to go down the firehouse a little bit. I never joined the juniors. A lot of the guys that came in the volunteer department with me, back then, I joined in 1978, January. A bunch of us had just gotten out of high school, and a bunch of guys had family in the department, and a whole bunch of us joined at the same time. But I didn't, all those guys were in the juniors. All my friends, all the guys I went to school with, they had been in the juniors. I never went into the juniors because, like I said, I was playing ball and doing all of that stuff.
Right.
But when I joined because of my dad. But before I even joined, when I was still in high school, and I've said this on other podcasts that I've been on, and it was pretty cool. My father introduced me to a couple of guys in the volunteers that had joined from town. Both of them were New York City firefighters. One was John Vigiano. John Vigiano was a lieutenant in Rescue 2 at the time. So this is 1976-ish. John, back in the day in FDNY, if you wanted to be an EMT, you had to go on. I think the city might have had a program where they were letting firefighters go to become EMTs. They weren't getting paid for it, but they let them go to school and get their EMT. I think that's how it worked. Anyway, he gets his EMT, and he's like, I'm not going to really practice a lot at work. He was a lieutenant in a rescue company, but he said, I'm going to join the volunteer fire department and ride as an EMT, ride the
So
ambulance.
he joined that for EMS.
He joined primarily to be an EMT, and back then we didn't have EMS only, so you had to be a firefighter as well. And of course, he was a firefighter. So him and my dad hit it off immediately. He was a Marine, Vigiano. My father was a Marine, so they hit it off immediately. So my father was very involved in the training. He loved training. He was all in, and John winds up helping him. Vigiano helps him with the training program. And all of us, all the young guys that we joined, we were getting trained by John Vigiano and others. And then there was another guy. His name was Larry Canillo. Larry passed away about a year and a half ago. He was an 82 engine. And he was an 82 engine. He got on a job like 1970. So he was an 82 engine when Dennis Smith wrote the book, Report from Engine
So he was
Company.
with Louis.
My cousin.
Louis Andre.
He was.
My cousin's an 82 engine.
Is he?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Chris
Yeah.
Henry.
So Larry was an 82 engine, and at that point, when I met him, he was a chauffeur. He was like he had a regular seat in the engine, but he was there through the war years, you know. And Larry joins, and so you know, I would go down there during the day, for daytime drills, and it was Vigiano, Larry Canillo, and a bunch of the other older guys in the department that were all military veterans, all the guys that were officers when I joined. But when I met John the first time, he says, you know, we get to know each other a little bit, and he says, hey, you want to go to work with me? I'm like, I didn't even know
Yes,
what
please.
I didn't know what a rescue company was. I had no idea. And so I went. I rode with him a couple of times. That's when they were on Carlton Avenue with 210 engine.
Sure.
And I said, wow, this is pretty cool. I mean, those guys were going to fires back then, too. Like,
Oh,
this
yeah.
is the mid-'70s, 1976, 1977. They were killing it, you know, going to fires. So I went, and I said, man, this is pretty cool. My neighbor directly across the street from me, his name was Pete Iovino. Pete was a firefighter in Engine 236 in East New York, Brooklyn. And they were killing it, too, back then. They were doing a lot of work.
Right.
I went to work with him a couple of times. And then my neighbor next door to me, right next door, was an old-timer, Dave O'Neill. He retired from 236. back in the, like, he probably retired in the early 70s or late 60s.
So when you say went to work, just say, hey, come to work with me. You're
That's
coming
it.
with me.
Right
He
along.
said, right along. And I went,
great.
and I rode,
It's awesome.
I rode with 236 a few times. I rode with Rescue.
It's like
I was
triads.
like, I said to myself, and I was hanging around the firehouse with my dad at that point a little bit, and I said, this is pretty cool, man. I think I might want to do this for a living. You know, this is pretty cool. So it kind of came over me. I graduated high school in June of 1977, and they were giving an FDNY exam in December. So I filed for the test. I took the test. I took the physical in the spring of 78. I had joined Deer Park in January of 78, and I just had to wait. I did pretty good on the exam, but you got to be 21 to get hired. So I was only 18 when I took the test. So
But you were 17 going to work with them.
it was awesome.
Stretch the line and
things
pulling.
have
No, I was
pulling
just watching.
ceilings.
I don't think I did too much. I just kind of watched, but it was
awesome.
pretty wild. But I got on the job the month after my 21st birthday. I turned 21. I turned 21 October 9th, 1980, and I got my letter from the city right in the beginning of November, and I got sworn in on November. We actually got sworn in on November 20th, effective November 22nd. So that's when I got on, 1980. Probably would have been on a year or so beforehand, but I wasn't old enough.
You weren't old.
So I got on. So I tell people all the time, I was living the dream, honestly. You know, my whole
I'd
career.
say so.
So it kind of worked out for me, you know. So, but it was due to my dad.
Now,
And my,
did your dad get involved because he was a military guy? Like, did he know other military guys, or was just friends?
you
in
know
the
what?
neighborhood?
He just had that. They had that incident on our block in the neighborhood.
And
It was
that
a
was
couple
it.
of doors down. We knew the people. Everybody. We had 15 houses on our block. We lived on a cul-de-sac, and he took it pretty
Yeah.
hard, man. The guy was a really nice guy.
Right.
Died of a heart attack. Took the ambulance a little while to get there, and it was during the day. And my father, you know, said, you know, man, they need help, so I'm going to go join.
I could do
That's
something.
awesome.
Yeah,
That's
and,
great.
and that's what he
It's
did.
awesome.
And that's why most people join the volunteer fire department. They join because they want to do something.
They want to help their neighbors.
They want to help
Right.
their neighbors. They want to join to help their community. And there's nothing better than that. Listen, I've always believed, and I'm a pretty spiritual person, and I believe that we were all put on this earth to serve in whatever way, shape, or form. Whether you become a cop, a firefighter, a doctor, a nurse, whatever, just even serving your community in the local organization, join the Knights of Columbus. We were all put here to serve one another, serve our community, serve our families, right? So that's why he did it. He joined because he
Agreed.
wanted to serve. You know, he was a Marine, you know, he's a tough guy. And then all the guys in the volleys, all the guys that were the officers and the chiefs when I joined were all military veterans, all of them,
Military,
all of them.
Right.
In fact, when I get on the fire department, most of the senior guys were military vets. We still had a few World War II guys hanging on, a lot of Korean War guys like my dad, that age group, and then we had a lot of Vietnam veterans,
yeah.
you know, coming in the job when I got on the job, and I worked with a lot of them. And so these guys, they made a man out of you. Honestly, in the volunteers, I had some unbelievable mentors. Like, you know, they weren't city firefighters, who was a bus driver. Another guy worked for Con Ed that my father knew, was a captain in the volleys. Another guy was an aircraft mechanic for TWA, goes on to become like the director of maintenance for TWA years later. He was the chief when I joined. But these guys all had all different backgrounds,
Right.
but they all had military experience, and they really did instill discipline in us young dummies. You know, we would torture these guys. You know, we were 18, 19-year-old knuckleheads, you know what I mean? But they kept us straight and narrow, and I do believe they made men out of us, honestly and truthfully. That's where it started for me. And of course, my dad, being my dad, he was a man of a very few words, but he was a tough guy. You guys, I don't know if you would remember, there used to be a show on TV years ago. It was called Gomer Pyle, USMC.
Oh, yeah.
So the sergeant in the show, his name was Vince Carter. My friends used to call my father Vince. My father was about 5'8", 5'9", pretty barrel-chested. He had the Marine tattoos on his forearms. He was in pretty good shape, my dad. And my friends were all afraid of him. He had the flat-top crew cut.
Yeah.
He looked just like him. My friends, so they all would say, "How's Vince?" Because they were all afraid of him. They didn't want to talk to him because he was pretty tough, my father. But that's the kind of guy. But those are the people that I was surrounded by as a kid growing up. And then when I got in the fire department, a lot of the guys were, they made more of a man out of you. I was 21 years old. I didn't know anything
Right.
about life.
I
You
wonder.
know what I noticed?
Yeah.
One thing I noticed about a lot of those vets, whether Vietnam or whatever, they were so calm, cool, and collective. Like nothing bothered them. Like even when I got on the job, there were quite a few around, and they were so calm at emergencies and fires. Like nothing bothered them. And you like would look at them and you'd be like, how is that guy not like panicking? But they were calm and cool and collective, and you saw them and you say, I want to be like that guy.
Yeah.
You know, like you just looked up to them.
I was going to say, I wonder if your father knew my grandfather. He was a Korean War vet, also worked as a lineman in Con Ed.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah, my father worked in Brooklyn his whole career.
Wow.
Yeah, he worked in Brooklyn. He used to go to Coney Island.
That was tough back in the day there,
Yeah.
right?
You know,
Yeah.
Con Ed back then, like a lot of the trades even, was just like our job. The
Right.
fire department, it was all about the team and the crew. And he loved his job, man. He worked there for 41 years. You know, he loved being a lineman. He loved the job. He was a senior guy at the end of his career, so they took care of him, you know.
Care, yep.
Hey, just hang on, we got it. You know what I mean? And but they really did take good care of him. He got sick at the end of his career. You know, he had gotten cancer and everything, but he survived it, and it recurred, and then he passed away like a year after he retired. He was young. He was like
sucks.
64 years old. But he loved the volunteer fire department, man. He loved it.
Let me ask you this: were you part of the generation that rode the back step?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I always think about that because, like, some of the guys that I speak to in the firehouse, they were like, the last of the guys riding the back step, and I was like, damn.
So
You
the
did that
volunteers.
one time, right?
Yeah, once. That's it.
Yeah, and the volunteers, we were riding the
That's it.
back step. And in fact, it was one winter. I remember I was a young kid. I might have been on probation or maybe just off probation. We were going to a structure fire, reported structure fire in the middle of a snowstorm, a blizzard, on right by the firehouse, Lake Avenue and Deer Park Avenue. We were crossing Deer Park Avenue, and we got T-boned by a car. But it was snowing really bad. There was about probably several inches of snow on the ground. Me and another kid on the back step, this guy, Brian Thomas, that's who it was. We both got thrown off the back step. Nothing happened. We didn't get hurt. Thankfully, we weren't going that fast, and the car wasn't going that fast because it was snowing out. But we were on the back step. And then when I got on the fire department in the city, we were still riding the back step a little bit. They were starting to transition away from it.
What
because
year
had
did they stop doing that?
It was around 1980, 81 when they completely did away with it.
Gotcha.
You know, we rode the back a little bit, but not long. You know, maybe I got on in 80 and when it was kind of taboo.
Yeah.
And we still, because we had
The
the close
volleys did it
cabs.
sometimes, like here and there, and
Yeah.
that's how I did it once.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Like, people didn't really check up
Right.
on you. You just did.
That's right. But it was pretty cool, actually. You know, it was like being, when you were a
That
kid
must have
growing
been a
up, you said,
blast.
this is
That
awesome,
was
man.
great.
I
Right?
used to watch the guys coming back from the parades when I was in
Yeah.
the juniors, and they'd be hanging on the back step still, like
Yeah.
from parades.
Going
and
down
stuff,
like the
and I'm-
LIE on the back.
It's like
step.
insane. You know?
Those old heavy trucks too. They probably had just
Oh, they
Oh,
were.
they
Be
just bounce
leaf
around.
spray.
And
Yeah,
they were all shifts.
Stick shifts,
Stick
yep.
shifts,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
And so I used to remember watching the guys when I was a kid. I'd be in the firehouse and they'd get a call, and I'd be watching the guys as the rig was going out the door. These guys were
running
getting
after.
dressed on the back step, putting their boots
That's
on,
awesome.
like
One-
where they're
one
holding
arm
on with
hooked,
one
yeah.
hand. It was crazy.
And guys
That is
running or
crazy.
sitting on the
No, it
back
was
step,
nuts.
and they'd be dragging their feet.
That was nuts.
That is
crazy stuff.
That
It
is
was nuts,
wild.
man.
So, where did you go to your first fire? City or
No, in Deer Park.
it was Deer
Yeah,
Park?
oh, yeah. In fact, my first real fire, my father was like second assistant chief at that point, and I had the nozzle.
Ah, hell
And we
yeah.
had a job. We had a pretty good job. It was a small house. It was right on Deer Park Avenue. And I'll live for every day I drive down Deer Park Avenue. There's a lot there, and it was.
It's a good stop. Good
But
stop,
it was actually a good job, and it was like 2 floors of fire.
Nice.
And I go in, put the fire out and everything. We go home the next day, and I told him my father was a man of a few words. We're sitting at the dinner table, and my mother's sitting there, me and my brothers and sisters. And my father says to my mother, I'll never forget, he says, the kid did a good job. That was the only thing he
Respect
said.
right there.
Yeah, it was it. But yeah, that was my first fire. My father was with me. It was pretty cool.
That's awesome.
And I'm sure there's a lot of guys like that. They've gone to fires with
Yep.
their dads,
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
don't
I
know
used
if
to
you
love
did.
it. I used to jump in,
Yeah.
you'd be driving the car and
Right.
jump in with them, go to the firehouse, jump on a rig.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
The only thing that was, when I was a kid and I first joined the fire department, my father was assistant chief. My bedroom was down the hall from my mother and father. like, I'm a kid. If I was out with my friends or whatever and I fell asleep and, my father would never wake me up. Like he'd say,
Yeah,
"Hey
he'd just
man,
leave
you miss a call."
Oh,
And
really?
and my father, I said, "You didn't wake me up." He says, "You're on your own, man." He says, because he liked getting out the door, like because his bedroom was right next to the stairs going down, and yeah, it was pretty funny, but it was pretty cool. It was
so,
cool.
Chief of FDNY, also Chief of Deer Park.
Mm-hmm.
Which ascent to the chief's office started first? Was it Deer Park or
Deer Park.
FDNY? Yeah.
Yeah. So I became an assistant chief in Deer Park in like 1995. I was elected as third assistant chief, and then I went through the chief's office. I did 6 years because I skipped over the second assistant. A guy ran against the guy and beat him. So the next year, he was only in the office a year. He says, I don't want to move up. He says, so you go, But I lost 2 years, out of it.
Yep. Right.
But I did it. It was good. So I did 6 years, and then I was out. And then in 2007, I wound up going back in the chief's office
Oh, okay.
as third assistant for a year. Then I was first assistant for a year, and then chief for 2 years. That was at a time, a lot of fire departments, all the drama that goes on. One of the chiefs they weren't happy with. It was a whole big to do.
Yep.
But so I did another 4 years in the chief's office. In that stint, I got out of there in 2011.
Wow.
But now I made chief in the city in 2000. I was chief of Deer Park. I was the chief of department in Deer Park when I got promoted to battalion chief.
Battalion chief?
Yeah.
Nice.
Wow.
Yeah, I was finishing up my term. I got promoted in September of 2000, and I finished my term at the end of 2000.
It's a lot.
It was a lot.
Probably a lot
My
to
wife
balance
wanted
there.
to kill me. But,
Oh, I bet.
but I'll tell you what, there's a lot to be said. You guys are young. You've been around.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, anybody that is a volunteer firefighter, volunteer EMT, whatever, like, if you don't have the support of your family, it's hard.
Absolutely.
Especially being a chief.
Mm-hmm.
My wife was a trooper, man. My wife raised my kids. I was running. My kids were young when I was chief the first time, and she was awesome, man. She worked. She was a teacher, and but she got it done, man. And she supported me the entire time, and even the second time, when I went back in, she was. I don't think she was happy at first, but
that is a big part of it.
You're doing it again.
I mean, like people used to say, like Kevin, your wife is a saint, and she likes it, but she doesn't like it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
we all go through those stages.
Yes, sir.
But if you don't have that support of your family and your wife,
100%.
and, they know you're running out to a fire, you're going to this. and
It's a lot of time away from your family.
Absolutely.
Man. A lot of time.
dinner tables and everything.
And once again, you're doing it because you love it. You're doing it because you want to serve the community. And all the perks that come with it. You know what I mean? That's not why I did it. It's nice. You get a nice car and all of that. It's all good. But it was a great experience. Honestly, the hardest job I ever had in my life was being the chief in a volunteer fire department.
Wow.
It's a
Really?
very, very hard
It's a lot
job.
to manage. It
Yeah,
really
I
is.
bet.
People
You
don't
deal-
realize how much time and effort it takes to
Time
be a
and
chief.
effort, and
If you're doing it right. If you're doing it right.
right, and you're dealing with people from all different backgrounds, all different professions, and they all add value to the fire department. That's what's cool about it. Like they all have different backgrounds, and so, but everybody has opinions too.
Yeah.
as you know.
I was just gonna say I have
As you know,
I have a couple questions that are going right in that direction.
Okay, good.
With being a
Yeah.
chief and just being
It's
a
hard.
leader. Yeah, for sure. So I definitely I want to pick your brain about certain things.
Yeah.
But we do a little segment on our show
right?
called Suspended or Not.
There we go.
I'm keeping it short just because we have a lot to talk about.
Right.
So I only kept one here. So we do our little ad for Frontline Optics here.
Oh, very cool.
These glasses, yeah. And then we will get into our submission here, which is actually pretty funny. All right.
Is this
so
one we haven't heard? We don't know this. Me and Kevin don't know this one.
I think I had sent it to you guys and said I'm saving this one for
Okay,
Tom Richardson.
It's good that we're getting them now, and if you have more, please send them in because it is comical.
Yep.
And it is very
It's
interesting.
funny.
Frontline Optics. So what makes us different? We know these shades are going to get beat up, which is why we offer a no questions asked replacement program to cover your lost or damaged sunglasses. When the time comes to get yours replaced, all you need to do is cover a $12 service fee and we'll ship a brand new pair to your door, no questions asked. Additionally, a portion of all sales is donated to the First Responders Children's Foundation, supporting the loved ones left behind by our brothers and sisters who gave the ultimate sacrifice in service to their communities. All of our glasses are polarized, and we offer free shipping and returns so you can try them out risk-free. Not enough? We have both Z87 and prescription styles available. Check us out at frontlineoptics.com or on Instagram at Frontline Optics. Use discount code VHP15 for 15% off. All right. So, suspended or not,
This is the best part.
this is when we get submissions. People will send us in either, real scenarios of, hey, should this be a suspension or not? Or they send us some pranks that they've done or just crazy firehouse stories, and we say, is it suspended or not? So this is a submission, and this is what they wrote. I am a volley on the island. When I was in an unnamed, busy, well-disciplined department, Nassau PD would shift change at our house. One of the officers must have dropped his keys in the parking lot, and a member found them. When he realized they were an officer's private vehicle, he then moved the vehicle behind the fence in the picnic area. The officer came back to find his car missing. He called it in as a stolen vehicle. Shortly after, a half dozen sector cars along with a sergeant arrive and start discussing the missing car. They all dispersed and went looking for it. About 15 minutes later, the sergeant returned. He went into our firehouse back room from the outside staircase. As he looked over into the yard, he spotted the car parked behind the fence. He called the officer on the radio to confirm this was in fact his car. When the officer arrived back at the firehouse, you could hear the sergeant yelling at the officer from inside the station. The sergeant knew immediately it was us. Suspended or not?
You asking me?
Oh, yeah.
I'm not. I don't think so, man. That was a prank, right? I mean,
It's a good prank.
It was a good prank. You know what I mean? Yeah, I think it was harmless. Like, right? It was harmless. It wasn't a personal thing, right? It was the car.
Right.
I don't think so.
The guy's
It's
not even
so
in
funny.
the firehouse.
I mean, probably need to have a chat with the young man that did it, and maybe have him apologize and all of that. But I don't know about suspension on that. I don't think so.
Do you remember any crazy stories in the Volley House or even an FDNY that may not have been suspension
Well, some
worthy?
you can't
but-
talk about,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's some you can't talk about for sure.
Well, listen, when pranks are pranks, but now in today's environment, right? The whole issue with hazing and all of that kind of
it's a big
stuff.
deal.
It's a big deal now, right? So you got to be very, very careful. Anything personal, anything personnel related, you got to be really, really careful. But I mean, there was several incidents during my tenure as chief where we had to suspend people. And sometimes it's just young people doing stupid things, like, you know what I mean? And oftentimes you could maybe get away without a suspension and just maybe, I'll give you a good one. So this is one of my favorites and I love these two kids. They were great kids. So they're young. They were, if they weren't still on probation, they were young. I get a call from, this is the second time I was chief too, one of the local 7-Elevens. We have 3 7-Elevens in Deer Park. I get one, and I go there, and the guy's flipping out. You know the mat when you walk in a store to wipe your feet? Mm-hmm. He said, 2 of you guys stole my mat. I said, what? It has 7-Eleven on and everything. What do you mean they stole? So he had cameras, so they were caught, like red-handed. So they were on probation. I think they were on probation, the two of them. They were good guys, too. They're two good kids. But now they took the thing and they put it in the trunk and they drove away. So they basically stole the guy's carpet. So now I'm like, what am I going to do with this? Where are you going? What am I going to do? I wound up suspending them. And I actually wound up throwing them out for a period. I said, you come back in a year.
When you get your act
That's
together.
a lesson learned. I said, you shouldn't have done it. That was stupid. They were stupid. Yeah. I laughed about it, but I said, I can't let them get away with it. The business
Especially on
owner,
probation.
the business owner was losing his mind. He was really, really upset.
They brought the mat to the firehouse?
They had it in their car. I said, go bring the mat back. I saw who it was, and I was actually laughing inside when I saw the video because it was kind of hilarious. I don't know Well, I said, what possesses you to steal a rug?
Wait, so how did the clerk know that they were firefighters? Did
They had
have
jackets
shirts
on.
Oh God.
Yeah,
So they went with a jacket on
Yeah, yeah.
into 7-Eleven. So, oh my
That's the
God.
dumbest.
So I wound up, you know, you got to give them all their due process and everything. We have an executive council, and it was pretty quick. And I just told the board, listen, they got to go. They were on probation. They weren't on probation, and they were only in a short period of time. Let them. They both came back.
I was gonna ask
They
that.
both
That's
came back.
Yeah.
They both came back. One guy wound up leaving and going to another department for a little while. He just came back now, years later. You know, he's an older guy now. He's married with kids and all of that
stealing
stuff.
rugs
So
anymore.
No,
not
no
stealing
more
rugs.
rugs.
When he joined back, and I remember the night we were swearing him in. I said, his name is Kevin. I said, "You're back." I says, "Behave yourself." You know, but he's a good kid. They're both good guys.
Check your trunk before you.
And then the
start,
other kid
you
came back and had a long period of time with us, and he's a good kid. So, and he had family members in the department too. But that was a tough one, honestly, because I felt bad, but I said I got to teach these guys a lesson.
Yeah,
I got to
Right.
teach them a
Yeah,
lesson.
yeah.
It's
for
also
sure.
like you're robbing a 7-Eleven. What are you doing?
Yeah, that's a little rough right there.
Yeah.
You know?
Especially if the 7-Eleven guy calls the fire department and like.
It's like,
Yeah.
what are you going to do to me?
Yeah.
You know, you got to do something about this. You know,
Yeah.
like,
Yo, it was a
now.
community business involved, right? And the
Yeah,
guy was very upset, and honestly, they were wearing a jacket, so they made us look bad. They
Yeah.
made the
Yeah,
fire
absolutely.
department look bad.
We've
you
talked
know?
about that, about, you know, professional appearance, and when you're wearing shirts, like, you shouldn't be doing things stupid to start with, but like, you go to the bar and you're wearing a shirt and then you're acting like an asshole. It's
And
reflection on the fire department.
when we swear them in, part of the oath of office is that you won't bring disrepute
Right,
on the
right. To the
department.
department,
Like,
yeah.
you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So it's in the bylaws, and I'm like, we got to do this. Like, you know, I didn't really want to, but I felt like I had to.
Right. Right.
You know, just
like
to
the
send a
idiot-
message to the other young people. Don't be stupid. That was, I remember going on the department floor. I said, listen, what they did was wrong, but it was really stupid. That was just dumb.
Right. Right.
It's like the same thing with the sticker on the car, and then you're driving like an idiot. You know,
Yeah.
everybody sees the sticker; they know where you're from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, come on, what are you doing?
And again, two good guys. They were good little firefighters. You know, they loved doing it, and they learned a lesson. Man, they learned a tough lesson. But they were young. They were very young. You know, so they recovered. They recovered from it. It's just like when you're growing up as a kid.
Right.
You know, you learn your lesson on something. Your mom or dad take something away or whatever, and say, "I'll never do that again." Like,
Yeah.
and that's it. And that's the end of
Well,
it.
sometimes you learn from your mistakes, right?
That's right.
I mean, even in training, when we do training, like
That's right.
sometimes mistakes are good because you'd rather
That's
have
right.
the mistake in
That's right.
training and
That's
not
right.
on the fire ground.
And that's what you want.
Right.
Same idea.
So the cop car, no suspension.
No suspension. All right.
warning.
All right.
Verbal
So,
warning.
job of the week. I'm gonna give a shout out to pretty much the whole island.
Yeah,
For
90-something departments.
Yeah, 90-something
Yeah.
departments. The fires out east. Job
600
well done.
acres, I think it was. They said
Something
like that.
crazy.
A
Couple miles long.
Sounds like it went super smooth.
There was some hiccups, but yes, it went very well. And, you know, I mean, we were doing the podcast here Saturday,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I said it. I was like, whoa, there's a big fire out east. And I did end up out there. I didn't do much while I was there, but I went as a coordinator. But just driving out there and you're looking at the smoke and you're like, it looks like Armageddon.
Yeah.
You know, and it's insane. But I think everybody did a great job for what they had. Super dry conditions, 22% humidity. The wind gusts, I think somebody said was up, and wind gusts are 60, 70 miles an
yeah.
hour.
Wow.
I have to
But-
say that on Twitter, it was trending. On,
Oh, I'm
on
sure.
Twitter, and a lot of praise for the volunteer firefighters.
Absolutely.
That were out there getting it done. You know, people saying it's a Saturday afternoon. These guys drop everything, go out there,
Yep.
and they put this thing out in a day.
That's right.
And
You know.
and there was some factors that helped, like the air guards out there.
Yep.
The 106, you know, those guys are phenomenal to start with, but it was their training weekend, so they were out there.
Oh,
so
yeah.
you know, they
Bunch
had
of
their
hands.
helicopters up with the Bambi buckets. You know, they had a. I'm driving out there and I'm looking. I'm like, wow, man, why is that plane circling? It was a C-130 circling the
Really?
whole time of the fire, just circling around. It was insane. I'm
that's
like,
pretty
whoa, that's pretty cool.
Providing intel, like
Yeah, they were giving some information. You know, they had a couple of military guys right at the command
awesome,
post.
yeah.
You know, they giant radios and antennas. I
You
was
know,
like,
I'm curious to
whoa.
know because they had the Bambi buckets
Yep.
for this fire, but they didn't have them at
I
the
don't
fires
think
in
they did.
2011. And I remember that was like a big
Yeah.
talking thing that apparently because it has to be approved by like a super high up level.
Yeah, I don't know how.
to use those.
Yeah,
Some
there's a
military, but
progression
I'm
to
sure
get
there's a
those
criteria.
resources, you know, and I would imagine from lessons of the past that they have a pretty streamlined process now. Like,
Right.
you know, I'm sure Rudy Sunderman, the fire commissioner,
Yeah, they
got
all
on
did
the
a great
horn right
job.
away with the county executive. County executive went to the governor, said, like, when you know, and I'm sure it happened very quickly.
Well, I'm
Yeah,
sure they wanted to protect their base too, because it was
Sure,
coming right at
absolutely,
them.
absolutely.
You know, so
Yeah, those
they
things
were
get
probably on
scary
top of it.
quick.
That was right on top of Gabreski, right?
Yeah, it
Yeah.
went right up, almost right to the runways right there. So
I always say the most fun I've ever had at a call was at a brush fire, and the scariest firefighting moment I've ever had was also at a brush fire, which was back in 2011 when the flames jumped us.
a lot of people, you know, the younger kids were like, you know, all those guys that talked about 95 now, you know, we got something to talk about. And I'm like, I think 95 was still worse.
Oh well,
It was.
Were you out there as a chief in
I was.
'95?
I was out
Yeah,
there.
That was your first
I
year?
was pretty much I was third assistant chief. We went out, and I went out with the brush truck, and I got to tell you, we used to get our share of brush fires in Deer Park at the Edgewood State property where Pilgrim State Hospital was
Right.
years ago. That's about an 880-acre preserve, and we used to get some really bad fires there over the years when I was a kid in the department, and we burnt up a couple of trucks in there over the years, and as did other departments. But I will say, you don't realize it when you're young and dumb. They're very dangerous fires. They're
Super
when
dangerous.
The wind shifts. They create their own wind, and when that thing's coming at you like a freight train, man, you're not getting away from it.
And the pine
I
trees,
was-
the
you know, you
pine
were-
needles, it
it's
just
crazy.
everything
I
takes off
said that
like
to
Wow.
Kevin the other
Wow,
day
man.
when we were at the fire in 2011. We were surrounding a house, and at first we were at a junkyard, and it was clear day, and then all of a sudden it just got dark, and we look up, and see the smoke head coming over us, and I look into the woods, and you just see the trees just
Yeah, just
turning
lighting
it
up.
like exploding,
Exploding,
and
that's
then
right.
it just started raining embers. And then our chief was calling us to this house that was there, and we surround this house, and flames jumped over us, and it sounded like a freight train coming over. We we all
Absolutely.
hit the floor because we're like, this thing's like right over our heads, and then all of a sudden, just everything's just like burned except the house. We saved the house.
Yeah.
good.
Well, they had one fire out there that lit up on its own. It was a crown fire. You know, they gave it as, you know, the tops of the trees are on fire or something like that, but they call it a crown fire. And it just took off and just burnt all the tops of the trees.
Right.
And the ground was
fine, right.
perfectly fine. Like it just went right over the top.
Right.
Like that's how intense it goes, you know.
Yeah, they're
And you
pretty
just
crazy.
don't realize it. They're super dangerous.
And not only that, like these 4x and these 6x, these military rigs that we ride around, these brush trucks, they're very dangerous, man.
Oh,
Guys,
absolutely.
run.
Guys have
we
gotten
had some guys get some serious injuries years ago riding on those things. You know, you're not really strapped in like you're riding on the back. One guy, I remember, he didn't break his neck, but he had a really bad neck injury. Whacked his head into one of the crossbars, and he was never the same.
No.
Oh,
He
wow.
never the same. He wound up really never getting back to work.
Wow.
He was a truck driver,
It's insane.
and he basically wound up being on disability from that. And I said, man, these things are so dangerous. They really are.
And there were a couple injuries out there.
Yeah.
One person got facial burns, second
Yeah,
degree.
yeah.
You know, from the fire or the radiant heat, whatever it was. And actually, when I was getting ready to leave, it was like a convoy of vehicles. And, you know, I go to pull out, and then an ambulance jumped in front of me, and it was like a slow motion. And all of a sudden, the ambulance stopped. They all jump out. I'm like, what's going on? So a guy comes up. He goes, it's going to be a couple minutes. That guy just fell off the top of the brush truck.
Jesus, really?
And a guy fell off. He was pulling a branch, I guess, off the top of the stump jumper and fell 15 feet. Hit his head on the pavement. And,
Wait, this was the other day?
yeah.
Oh wow.
Damn.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
so
crazy.
they packaged them up. I got out of the car with the radio. It's, you know, they had plenty of people, but they packaged them up, and one of the departments transported them.
And the
down.
guys that drive those, you got to know what you're doing.
Oh, you got to really.
They're
know.
dangerous to drive. We got a couple of guys in my department that are really good, and they love it. I was never one of those guys that wanted to drive those things because you really have to be skilled to be able to operate in
Right.
the woods, man. You really do have to know what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Jumping over freaking down trees and big
it's
logs
pretty heavy
and
duty.
stuff. Yeah.
You know, and there's a lot of those trees out there that are, you know, dead and they're just standing. And, you know, if you hit them the wrong way and they snap and they can come flying out, it can really hurt somebody. And
Yeah.
there's been many firefighters. I mean, a lot of them have a lot of roll bars and screens now and everything else to protect you. But a lot of firefighters have been hurt head trauma and everything else
Yeah.
from just falling branches
Yep.
and trees.
Yeah. I
They'll
could
kill you.
imagine being in the back of one of those things, and if you jump over a decent sized log, I'm sure those guys in the
Oh,
back
it-
are
it
really
bounces.
getting
Oh, yeah,
launched
100%.
up.
That's
right?
why you drive slow.
Yeah.
Nice.
Right.
But they did a great job, I got to say.
Yeah,
And,
definitely
It
job
did
of the
work
week.
out. I think the other thing that I don't want to say was a huge help, but Senator Rich just had, I think, the first fire, and then West Hampton after that.
Right.
And then another one popped up in Eastport. So they had a lot of resources
Like right in the same area?
away.
Yeah.
So as soon as they got Senator Rich's under control, they were able to move those resources, And then, hats off, they contacted Nassau County. They had 11 departments from Nassau come out. They were on standby at
Yeah.
the fire academy, but, they were ready to go.
If they needed them, yeah.
So there were a lot of departments and a lot of people stepped up and did a great job.
No, it's great.
What are the odds? 30 years to follow the 1999
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
Because I
Isn't that
looked it up.
insane?
I was like, wildfires of
Yep.
on Google, and it said 1995. So what are the odds? 2025.
And to your point earlier, it was all volunteer firefighters.
Yeah.
These guys all dropped what they were doing at home and spent, half a day. or a
Well,
day.
except
long
for
day.
B&L was there. I
B&L
saw
was
them.
there.
Getting overtime.
They were breaking my chops when they saw me. So, yeah, they're like, we're getting paid. I go, yeah, I know. You can go home now.
That's funny. That's funny.
Let's get into multi-purpose webbing.
You'll like this one, Chief. It's actually pretty cool.
Multi-purpose webbing is a firefighter-owned business dedicated to creating products that facilitate fireground efficiency. The MPW Personal Carry is a webbing system designed for simpler firefighter and civilian removal. The MPW can be separated to allow for search, haul, and utility function. The rated system comes complete with dual-action palm-activated carabiner, mil-spec webbing, and carry case. Our glove clamp is by far the best solution for out-of-pocket glove carry. Never lose a glove again. Use discount code VHP15 for 15% off site-wide. It's mpwebbing.com. And Phil, do you want to grab
Oh, yeah, I
some
got this
stuff out of
box full
that
of
box?
stuff
So we
here.
have a giveaway that we're doing, a Firewire giveaway.
So this is 22 feet of webbing, like accordioned in here. It pulls right out, so you can put it in your pocket,
box
bring it
full
on
of
your
stuff.
coat.
Right.
Yeah,
Comes
watch
right
your,
out.
your
It's
mic.
got a loop, so you can put it around your hand, use it for search.
Yep.
Or you can lower it down, you can grab a tool, bring it up to
Yeah.
the roof. It's got a lot of uses. It's actually
22
pretty neat.
feet, you said?
22.
22.
Yeah.
So this is from
Original SWAT.
yeah, the, original SWAT. So we're doing a giveaway here, and basically what we will do is we're gonna put out a post, and you could follow all of our associated partners, podcasts, Firewire app, follow us on social media, tag 3 friends for your chance to win these original SWAT boots, the Alpha Freedom.
Oh, boots. That's a hat.
And you get you get the hat, and you get a tactical pen.
Nice. Look at those boots.
Yeah, these are nice boots, nice tack boots, because they're nice. They have material here, so they have a nice little bend.
That
to
is
them.
pretty nice.
Yeah, so they're meant for because a lot of people that wear the tech boots around the firehouse or just EMS people, whatever. It's so it's not so loose on your foot. It gets they call it hands free. But real nice boot.
Flashlight on the pen.
Yeah, you'll get the tactical pen. It's got a flashlight, screwdriver in it.
Where's the screwdriver?
It's on. I think you pull the other part out.
Don't break it.
Yeah. There you go.
Screwdriver.
You get the hat, you get the bottle,
Interesting.
and a bottle opener. So we will put a post out
Yep.
for that.
Nice.
And again, that is
One of
original.
those wallet bottle openers. Card.
Oh yeah,
Oh, the metal. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Might as well open it.
yeah. So yeah, we will put a post out for that.
Nice
Firefighters don't need bottle openers, do they? I don't know.
So, Chief, we were discussing before some of your leadership credentials, and I'm curious. I want to dive into some of your leadership experience and maybe some advice or tips that you can give for other people out there. So, I guess the first question I wanted to ask is when you joined the fire department, both Deer Park and FDNY. Did you have an ambition to be an officer?
I had an ambition to be an officer. After a couple of years, I said, you know what? I'd like to make battalion chief by the time I have 20 years. And that was after being on the job a couple of years and seeing how the job worked and understanding the promotional process and how competitive it was. And, you know, I was very young when I got on. So I said, you know what? If I could be a chief by the time I'm 41 years old or so, I think I'll be happy with that. But I did not aspire to go past that, to be quite frank. I didn't. I was a battalion chief for 14 years, almost 15.
Oh, wow.
And I was in a great battalion in Brooklyn, in Battalion 38 in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. I loved every tour. It was great. We were a pretty busy battalion, great companies. Went to a lot of fires. It was awesome. And then my good friend, and you should probably get him on his podcast at some point, Frank Lieb.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I know
Frank
Frank.
Lee.
It's
Frank-
on my list to come on.
Frank is one of the superstars, you know, that came through the FDNY, and he was in a group with a bunch of guys. They studied for all the ranks together, and he says, we're going to start studying for deputy chief. He says, you should come in our study group. I'm like, Frank, at that point, I think I had 33 years in the fire department. I was a chief for I think I was a chief for like 12 or 13 already. I said, I don't know if I have it in me, man. The only good thing was my kids were all grown now, you know? So I couldn't say I didn't have the time, like, you know what I mean? I was working on the side, working at the fire academy, and I was like, I don't know, man, if I could do this. He talked me into it. I went to the first meeting, and I was inspired by these guys. They were younger. They were into the job like nobody else. Like, these guys were in. And so I started to study. And I wound up doing pretty good on the exam. Everybody laughs because I got promoted the last day of the battalion chief's list.
Wow.
The list was expiring. I was a captain of Squad 270. I almost turned down a promotion, actually. But
Great spot.
I loved it. So I got called. I think I called on a Wednesday. Cap, you're getting promoted on Friday to battalion chief. We're promoting 32 battalion chiefs, which was a large number of chiefs at one time. I'm like, what? I mean, I didn't expect it because the list had slowed down. They hadn't promoted in quite some time. There was still quite a few. The list was a pretty big list. And I was not expecting it. But after thinking about it, you know, I said I have to take the promotion. I studied. My kids were young at that time. I got promoted in 2000. So my son was like 8 years old. So I took the position. You know, I got promoted and it all worked out. But then when I started studying for the deputies test, I got into it, you know. I said, I could do this, you know. And these guys were great. Frank and Joe Jordan and Richie
Jordan,
Wiley.
yeah.
Richie Blattis got in the group. Jimmy Kane. Who else was in that group? That might have been it. It was 5 or 6 of us. And I wound up writing number 1 on the deputies list. So it was a running joke, you know. At one
The young
time,
guys helped you out?
they were great, man. They were, you know, they laughed at me because when I came to the first study group, I came with my milk crate with my books in it, like hardcover books. Like
They got their iPads
they
going?
got their iPads and they're laughing at me. I'm like, all right, we'll see. Okay. And I wound up doing pretty good, but only because of them. They really motivated me, inspired me. I was really encouraged by all of them. And our entire group got promoted except for one, and he turned it down, Richie Wiley.
Oh,
We were all on the list, and Richie would have got promoted with Frank. They were down further on the list. But we all made deputy chief, and in fact, 1, 2, 3, 4 of us became staff chiefs. Me, Joe Jordan, Richie Blattis, and Frank Leap. And I joked, and when I got promoted to chief of department, I said, I think we might have had the most successful study group ever. I said, we all made staff, 4 of us. Jimmy Kane would have been a staff chief, except for the fact that he wound up having a heart attack, essentially, and he had to retire.
Man.
Thank God he was okay. And then Richie turned it down. You know, he's still working in the rescue battalion. But
He likes the rescue battalion.
yeah, he loves it. And so that's my story as far as that goes. But I never, and people ask me all the time, did you ever aspire to be the chief of department? I says, absolutely not.
That was going to be my next question.
Absolutely not.
You make it to battalion chief. Do you ever think, all right, like, there's a couple more steps I could go here? You know, were you gunning for that, or just kind of as you went along, you just fell into these
I
positions?
took 2 deputy chief's exams before the one I did well on. I didn't really study hard. In fact, one I didn't study at all, and I failed by a couple of points. And I said, I'm good. I didn't really want it anyway. And then the next one I did study for a little bit. You know, I put some time in. It was a really, really difficult test, really difficult. That was like 2007. And that's the one I probably should have studied harder to get promoted. It was like, that was the time when all my contemporaries were making deputy. And I think I failed by a point.
Oh, wow.
So I didn't get on the list. So then I was like, well, it's not in the cards, man. I'll just stay as a battalion chief. And I wound up being a battalion chief another 7 or 8 years.
Wow.
And then they talked me into taking the 2013 exam. By the time the list came out, I got promoted at the end of 2014. But then, you know, things happen in this job. Timing is everything. You know, I got an opportunity. A friend of mine was chief of training. And I didn't really know him that well. You know, I shouldn't even say he was a friend of mine. He was a guy I knew. This guy, Jimmy Hodgins, was the chief of training, was a tremendous individual. He calls me up, and he says, hey, would you consider coming to be the chief of the fire academy? I never gave anything a thought of being a staff chief. And I said, I don't know, Jim. I only been a deputy like 2.5 years. I had a good spot, and I was really enjoying it. And then I said, you know what? At that point, I have 37 years in the fire department.
Wow.
And I said, you know what, man, this job has been so good to me. I think it's probably the right thing to give back now for the next next few years that I can. And I remembered that from Chief Pete Gansey. When he became a staff chief, I remember being at a meeting, and I asked him, how come you became a staff chief? He says, you know what? He said the same what I just said. The job was good to me, man. He says, and I felt like it was time to give back when they asked me. So I did it. I went to the fire academy, and then timing is everything. Jimmy Hodgins decides to retire a short time later, like a year later, and they say, we're gonna make you the chief of training. I'm like, I've only been the chief of the fire academy less than a year. So now I'm chief of training. A year goes by, a little more than a year, and Chief Leonard retires, and then I'm the chief of training, and they interviewed 4 of us for chief of department. Me, John Sudnick, Tony DeVita, and this guy, Eddie Baggett. So they interview us. I'm like, I remember, I'll never forget the commissioner's executive assistant called me. She goes, Chief, I need to make an appointment for you. I said, for what? She goes, for an interview. I said, interview for what? She goes, chief of department. I said, what? I says, I've only been on the staff less than 2 years. She goes, no, the commissioner wants to interview you. I'm like, all right. I need a resume. I'm like, resume? I went to college and everything. A resume. So I had a master's degree and all of that, and I was like, I never had a resume, though. So my daughter was in HR. She was an HR manager. I called my daughter.
Perfect.
I said, Jen, you got to help me write a resume. So we did it. I went through the interview, and I didn't get chief of department, but then he asked me to be chief operations. And I was like, I'm going to retire like another year and a half. When I got my 40 years, I'm going to retire. It's okay. I need you to take the job. I said, I'll tell you the truth, Commissioner, I'd rather stay in training. And he says, no, I really want you to take the job. I said, I'd really rather stay in training. He said, well, I'm not really asking you. I said, so then I became chief operations, and I did that for 2.5 years. And then
Well, sidebar on that one. I would invite him to the firehouse. I would text him, come for lunch. He'd always be like, I'm busy. Or it would be, I come for dessert. So he comes by, we're talking to his aide. He was upstairs talking to the chief. Comes back down, we were all sitting at the kitchen table. And I just look at him and I'm like, so chief, you gonna be the next chief of department? And he goes, nah, Kev. Nah, not me. Remember that?
yeah,
Remember that
I do.
conversation? So then I go, why? And he's like, nah, Sudnick's got it. He's locked up. So I said, chief operations? And he says, nah, not me. I'm going to stay right where I am, right? The next day, they announced who the chief of department, chief of operations. I text him. He goes, I got to keep my cards close. I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
but it was always good when it came by the
just like I
firehouse.
said,
It just
timing is
happens.
everything. And then after 2.5 years, Chief Sudnick decided to retire. and then they made me acting chief of department, and then they made me permanent, I think, a couple of months later. But I was only the chief of department, including the acting time, like 10 months,
And that
9
long,
months,
right?
you know, and I made a decision to retire. But it was time, you know, I had 41, a little over 41 years, and I was like, it's time to go, man, and I retired. I had a great career. man.
That's,
It
I was just
awesome.
gonna say it's
It
a
was
hell of a
awesome.
career,
It's an
man.
amazing
It
career.
was awesome, man.
That's a
Yeah.
long time too. 41
I worked
years.
in great places. I worked with great people, and that's what it's about. It's all about the people. You know, it's all about the people you work with in the fire department, both career and volunteer. You know, and the volunteer is really special in such a way that you're in a volunteer department with people that you know. These are people that you've been friends with for
Neighbors,
like now
friends.
over for like 40. I think I'm in the fire department in Deer Park 47 years. And I know some of these people my whole time I'm there, even before that when I was a kid.
Right.
Some of these
What-
guys that are still there.
What made you want to be an officer in the Volleys? Was there something that
You know what?
Just
You know,
pushed
I think it was, again, I think it was timing thing in my company. You know, they were looking for officers, and I was very young. Like, I was only in the fire department 4 or 5 years. So I ran for second lieutenant, and I made second lieutenant. I made first lieutenant, then I got suspended for a little while, and then I came back years later as a captain.
That's funny.
it's usually the people that are around all the time and doing stuff
Yeah,
are the
yeah.
ones that get in trouble.
Yeah,
It's just the way it is.
It was an experience, you know, part of the game. You know, you learn lessons in your
Learn
life.
your
right?
lesson.
So, another question I wanted to ask you kind of follows up with that. You know, you came on here at this podcast. You're a very humble guy. How do you stay humble? Because some people become chief of volunteer department, quickly develop an ego. You were the chief of a volunteer fire department, also the chief of the most elite fire department in the world. But you continue to serve and continue and stay involved. And I know a lot of that comes from within, but is there any advice or tips you can offer to current or aspiring officers?
100%. So I think, honestly, I learned humility from my father. My father was a quiet, humble. When my father died, we didn't even know. Like, he was a sergeant in the Marine Corps. I know he was in combat in Korea. His wish was to be buried in his dress blues. So we were burying him in his dress blues, and my mother had all his ribbons and stuff. Turned out he had a Purple Heart because he got wounded in battle. We never had any idea. He never
Really?
talked. None.
Wow.
And but I learned, I think, humility from my mother. My mother was the same way. My mother was a pretty humble person. But in this business, honestly, you know, this is a humbling business, man. Like, you know, you could think you're on top of your game, man. Like, you are the shit. Like, you know what I mean? And then you look like a fool. Like, you know, you make a bad, whatever, things happen. But I always tell people, no matter what rank you are, like you're a firefighter. We're all firefighters. And that's how I try to live my life in the fire department, in the fire service, both in the volunteers and the career. I'm a firefighter. That's who I am at heart. In fact, when they transitioned, when I was getting ready to retire, when the new mayor was elected, when Mayor Adams was elected, they do like these interviews, these transition interviews. So I was chief of department. So I go to this interview, and the guy just asked me a question. He said, "Hey, you know, Chief, would you ever be interested in maybe being a commissioner?" And I think they were just asking it to ask it, kind of thing. I said to the guy, I said, "Absolutely not." So he says, "Well, why do you say that?" So I said, "You know what? I'm a firefighter. That's who I am. It's just not my thing. Like, I don't think I would be good at it. Number one, number two, it's just not my thing. I'm a firefighter." So I always try to go to work like that and make sure that the firefighters are the people that do this job, firefighters and the fire officers. And when you're a chief officer, especially in headquarters, you know, I'm working in an office building. I just tried to say every day when I went to work, what are we going to do today? What are we going to do to make sure we're taking care of the troops? You know, make their life a little easier, make it better, because they're out there, some companies doing 7,000, 8,000 runs, you know, 20, 30 runs a tour, and there's a lot of quiet companies too, but they're out there doing the job each and every day, getting it done, and that was why I tried to live by that. Like, I'm a firefighter, and I want to think like a firefighter, and I did think like a firefighter. I got in trouble for doing that a lot of times, but when we were having debates, I would say, what do you think the firefighters thinking in the field right now? Like, you know what I mean? That's why I
Right.
felt like we had to communicate with the field a lot, and I did that. I tried to do that more often than not. In fact, in the volunteer department, I learned a lot from the first time I was chief to the second time, and all the mistakes I made the first time. And one of the biggest issues from a leadership perspective is communication. You have to communicate with the people that work for you, man. Like whether volunteer or career. And today, with all this, you can communicate instantly with your membership, right? And our chiefs do a pretty good job, man, between emails and texts. And a lot of guys do social media. I don't. But there's a lot of ways to communicate with people to keep them informed of what's going on, let them know they're doing a good job. And we did that in FDNY. We learned a lot from COVID, that we were able to, use medium like, Zoom and things like that to talk to the firehouse, the guys in the firehouse. We were talking to the people in the firehouse from headquarters. I was sitting at my desk in headquarters, and I was talking to hundreds of firefighters at one time, keeping them informed, sending information out. They want to know what's going on if you keep informed. But at the end of the day, leadership, and I learned this from a long, long time ago when I first became a lieutenant. There was a guy named Bob Burns. He was a chief, battalion chief, and he taught in our first line supervisor program. And I always remembered this, and I believe it 100%. He said everybody has different definition of leadership, right? Leadership is about influence. It's about being able to influence people. But then he would say, so what kind of people, but he also said, leadership is about trust, mutual trust. So what kind of people do people trust? People trust people that are of good character, right? And that are competent. So if you're a good person, you communicate, and you're good at your job, people are going to trust you. And so I always remembered that, so I always wanted to be the best I could be in every position. Because I always tell people all the time, nobody wants to suck at their job.
Right.
Nobody wants to be a bad firefighter. You know what I mean? People want to learn. They want to do the job. So let's help them do it, but be the best you could be. And the other mantra that I always kind of lived by, and I tell my son now, I says, be a student of the business. There is so much information out there today. Absolutely. You guys are doing this podcast. People are going to hear me speak. There's resources online between firefighterclosecalls.com, firehouse.com, fire engineer. For people to say there's no way to learn things, right? That's why I used to laugh. People come down to firehouse, and what are we going to drill on tonight? Like, are you kidding me? Like, really? Are you kidding?
Find anything.
Right? And so, and the other thing in the volunteers is really important. Don't waste their time. People, they're volunteers. They got jobs. They got families. So I used to tell people, they're coming down for a drill, 1 hour. Keep their attention for an hour, teach them something, and send them home. Whether it's taking a portable ladder off the rig, taking the hearse tool out, whatever it is, 1 hour. Keep them for an hour, teach them something, send them home. Let them go home to their family. So I think that's a big deal. But those are kind of the lessons I've learned over the year in leadership, and how I kind of tried to live by it as best I could. And I made a lot of mistakes, man. Believe me, nobody's perfect. Right. This is a hard business, especially when you rise up in the ranks, the politics of it all. I know I had some great guys that I was with in the volunteers, and they never became chiefs. And I would ask some of them, and I said, well, just a bad politician, man.
Yeah.
I mean, at least they're like you... they're like man enough to admit that, because some people jump right into it.
That's right.
And it's funny because everything you just said was going to my next question, which is, as a leader, especially in a volunteer organization, you can't make everybody happy. So what is the best way to communicate your decisions to members that may not agree with you?
That's a great question. And I learned that I screwed that up many times the first time around in the chief's office to the second time. And here's what I say. Every volunteer firehouse, every single one of your firehouses has the crew that hangs out in the firehouse in the morning. They come down and have their coffee.
We talked about
the old timers.
Yeah.
here's what I learned.
The Breakfast Club.
Yeah.
When I was a young kid, we used to torture those guys. I think we were outright disrespectful to them, to be honest with you. But they all have contributed to your department. Like they
and the
made
wisdom.
the wisdom.
Yep.
Like I talked to you about all these military vets. They built these departments over years and years and years, right? So yeah, I tell guys, you have to respect them, whether you agree with them or disagree with them. Now, when I was chief the first time, I used to bang heads with those guys all the time because they'd be down there, bad mouthing the chief's office and all sorts of stuff. And I used to get aggravated. I didn't have the patience for it. But the second time around, I said, you know what? I'm going to hang out with those guys. Now, my work schedule was conducive. I was around during the day a lot. I used to go down to the firehouse, and I used to sit there with them. Some of them were my worst enemies. They hated me. But I'm telling you, if you wanted to get information out to the troops, all you had to do was sit around and have coffee with those guys. It was out immediately.
Yeah.
They didn't do social media, those guys. They weren't doing emails then and all of that. But the word would spread. You'd put it, you put it in their ear. And the other thing was I always asked them their opinion. I wanted to hear their opinion and say, tell me what you think. This is what I'm thinking. I didn't do that the first time around, and it came back to bite me a lot of times. So when I went to the department floor for a department meeting, the second time around, I had I thought I had an easier time of it. I didn't have those adversarial conversations. You could be on a department meeting or a company meeting, and the captain or the chief's getting into it with one of the members, like they're having an argument on the floor. I found the second time around, I think I did a better job because I really embraced the old guys that I learned to have a lot more respect for than I ever did, and I should have over the years. But I tell the young guys now, I tell all these young kids, we just had a whole bunch of new kids come in the last few months. I said, listen to these guys, man. Listen, sit down and talk to them. I said, they got a lot to offer. We went the other day, a whole bunch of us, to visit one of the old guys who was a captain when I joined. He's in like a bit of a nursing home now. He's having a hard time. He's 86 years old. So it was a whole bunch of us went to visit him the other day, like 15 of us, and some of the young kids came.
Oh, nice.
That's
And
great.
so we were telling the young kids stories about him.
them, yeah.
I said, this guy Frank he worked for Con Ed with my father, and he was our safety guy. He wound up being his health and safety guy for Con Ed. He was our first safety officer, our first health and safety officer. He loved it. Like, he was so into it. He would get up on the department floor for a report, and his reports were always long. And the guys were like, oh my God, we got to listen to this again. But we were telling the young guys, this guy did a lot for our department to keep you all and keep us all as safe as possible in this dangerous business that we do, right? But I tried it, and it was impactful. I saw these kids, they were talking to him. They were sitting talking to him for about 15 minutes, asking him questions, and because he still got all his marbles, he's just medically having a hard time. But I'm telling you, embrace and respect the old folks, the older guys and gals that have been around for a long time. They have a lot of wisdom, like you said, they do. And we should appreciate that. And the people that built these volunteer fire departments years ago were brilliant. Brilliant people. I think look about your department, like Setauket, it's such a big district. My department, we have a beautiful facility, beautiful apparatus, like most of our departments. But these people that started these things from their freaking garages and backyards.
Yeah.
They used to use their own tools and equipment to put on the rigs.
And they did it because of their community, man. Deer Park, it started because of a bad brush fire. They said, we got to start a fire department. This is crazy. And they started a fire department. And just a bunch of guys met at somebody's house. And they started a fire department back in the 30s. And look what it's become. So there's a lot of history. I try to tell people, like when I see young guys all the time, I say, get a copy of the 50th anniversary, 75th anniversary. We're 90 plus year now, but read these. These got great stories in them, man.
It's fun. I read the one from Smithtown Fire Department, and Smithtown was established in 1908, I think. So they're 50.
Yeah.
And they were talking about a big fire, but it wasn't like a big fire, say at like this address. It was like, who remembers this fire at like Farmer Frank's house? Like, like everyone knew
Wild,
each other in
man.
the community. It was
Yeah,
wild to
There
read.
were no street addresses. It went by people's names back then.
exactly.
You know?
That's right.
It was really, really wild to read.
So
That's like
we
my,
don't-
my
we-
town is like that too. You know,
Yeah.
it's one of the first towns. It was the first town founded in town of Brookhaven,
Right.
1655.
Yeah, man.
And the department started in 1909. But same thing, you know, they were borrowing people's garages
Yeah.
and getting money together to buy a fire truck and start a fire department. And you think about how evolved that must have been to try to get a group of people together and get enough money to get a fire truck. Like back then, like that's
Think
insane.
about the politicians that came up with the idea of fire districts. Fire
Right.
districts are very, very powerful. You can't. The governor is
I-
the only one that can abolish a fire district, you know, with public referendum. But fire companies, you know, are different. They're private corporations that contract with the local townships, right? Villages are always. They have issues a lot of times because of funding.
Yeah, yeah.
But fire districts that can tax and get the money direct almost, it's brilliant.
I
it's
actually
brilliant.
said it on the podcast. I said, you know, when they invented it, they gave commissioners way too much power.
Yeah.
You know, and I said this as a firefighter. I said it as an officer chief and as a
Yeah,
commissioner,
yeah.
and now that I'm not.
Yeah.
But I said the amount of power that they gave fire districts and fire commissioners is totally
It's amazing.
insane. I mean, you vote on your school budget,
Yeah.
but you get 3 commissioners and you say, oh, we're raising taxes.
Yeah.
You know, it's amazing. And then to be fiscally responsible with that money and figure it out and make sure you're doing the right thing, it takes a lot. It's a big
It does.
tool.
It's a big deal, you know. But history in the fire department is so important. So that would be my recommendation to a lot of the young people coming up in leadership positions. Know the history of your organization. Appreciate the history. Keep in touch with the older folks that are still around, and get to know them and ask them questions. You might not like them, you might not agree with them, but they got a lot up here, man. They got a lot. And then, you know, of course, we all have the wing nuts, you know, but they're wing nuts, like whatever. But they might have a nugget once in a while.
Yep.
They say, "I didn't think of that."
Right. No, that's amazing. I think that's great advice. The next question is, how do you deal with ego in the firehouse? If someone isn't pulling their weight or constantly pushing back on your ideas, how do you peel back their ego to make them a better team player?
So let's all be honest with one another. We all have egos.
We all do.
Most of us in this business, we all have egos. That's part of, I think subconsciously, that's part of why we do it a little bit. You know what I mean? We want to be that hero guy or gal, right?
yeah.
That's part of it, right? But I think it goes again back to teaching people a little bit about humility. I think that when somebody, and we all know the folks with huge egos, you know, they just can't help themselves. But I think it comes down to being the voice of reason in the room and putting your arm around their shoulder and say, hey, think about this. And I think it's important when you see that happening to young people that have potential, you know, and sometimes that ruins them, like because they don't listen. But if you get it early enough and you get in their ear sooner than later, you can maybe prevent them from, committing political suicide, if you will, like, you know what I mean, so that they can advance. Because you can see, I know plenty of guys that were really good, but they just couldn't get elected because of their egos and their personalities. And so I think that as a senior firefighter, a senior member of the organization, I think it's our responsibility when we see that, you know, to kind of help them out, you know, and be a good mentor.
Mentor. I was gonna ask
Mentorship
about
is so important, man. Like, mentorship is beyond important. It's one of the most important things, particularly in volunteer department. Years ago, I know when I joined, and we did it for many, many years, you used to have a sponsor.
Yep.
You used to have a sponsor in the company that you were joining, and the sponsor had to basically coach you along, and they even, back in the day, the sponsor would go talk to the guy's family. Hey, you know, just want to let you know what they're getting into. And some guys were good at it, some guys weren't, you know what I mean? But I think there was something to be said for that. But mentorship is such an important part of our business, you know, bringing people along, teaching them the right way, sending them down the right road. And it's hard today. It's much harder than it is today than it was when we were young or when I was young.
Right.
It's very difficult. But mentorship, teach them humility, and simply, put your arm around them and say, hey, come here. I think you're a really good kid. I think you're a really good person. I think you got potential here, but you got to tighten it up a little bit, man, because you're going down a bad road here. Like, you know what I mean?
Right.
I think that's just how I would handle it.
And that could help motivate them too, and put them in the right direction. So you're kind of leading them and mentoring them as you go, and it
Absolutely.
gives them a good path.
Absolutely.
I
So-
think you almost need that because there's really
Yeah.
what credential is there to become a second lieutenant and start that journey, right?
And a lot of departments are
Us-
having issues getting officers because people
Yeah.
do not want to do it anymore.
Right.
You're seeing, at least here on Long Island, we're seeing a lot of recycled officers. They're coming back through the ranks like
Yes.
you did. I
Yes.
went back in as chief. Because we're not either leading them or motivating them in the right direction to make them want to be an officer. And then they see some of the nonsense and the BS, and they say, "Do I really want to get involved with that?"
Yeah.
But I think a lot of that comes back to mentoring and the
But that
culture
also
of the department.
and it comes back to being a good leader to begin with because if you can't lead a group of people and push them in the right direction, why would the next guy ever want to be a
Exactly.
lieutenant? Like what would ever persuade that next guy to ever want to do it? If you don't make them all feel good and be like, wow, this guy is an officer and he's making a difference. Like I resonate so much with that because I feel like I need the perspective of someone who did it in a good light instead of everyone who just talks shit about, being an officer sucks. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that.
But we need to, it's our job, you as an officer or as commissioners and former chiefs and everything else, is that we have to help other people be successful. And we need them to be able to take over our positions. If we're not pushing people or getting people to work and build them up, who's going to take over for us when we're gone? You look at these senior guys like you were talking about, they did the job to build the foundation. And now that's our job as older or senior firefighters or you as a captain now to try to get those other people to build them up and want to do this, and then
Try to
we're going to
pass
be the
it
old
on.
guys standing there.
Pass it on.
Exactly.
One of the things you made a good point about is that a lot of discussion, a lot of writing about recruitment and retention, right? It's like the big buzzwords, right, in the volunteer fire service. But when you do a lot of reading about it, one of the main reasons, if not the main reason for poor retention, when you talk to people that leave, it's poor leadership.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
We spoke
Yeah,
about
I was
that.
gonna say we have-
Kevin,
That's
we
the
spoke about
number
that.
one problem is that people that are poor leaders, whether it's at a company level or at a department level, people don't want to work for people like that. They don't want to be around them. They don't want to listen to them. And so it goes all the way back to what I said before. If you just kind of stay grounded, I'm a firefighter just like you. I just got elected. And we're here to do a job. We have a mission. We have a focus. We're supposed to be taking care of the community. And if you kind of, it sounds corny sometimes, but that's the truth.
But good treatment is like the currency of the volunteer fire
That's
department.
right.
There's nothing
That's
else
right.
to it,
Right.
right?
That-
You don't have to show up.
You know what I tell people all the time? I used to tell people all the time, you know what works really well? A simple thank you, man. Just say thank you. Did a good job. I got into the habit, particularly my second time around chief's office, when somebody did a good job for me, whatever it was, it didn't even have to be, a fire operation or anything like that. I would write them a little note, and I would send it to them in the mail.
Oh,
Oh, that's really
I
nice.
used to
that's a
write a
cool
note.
idea.
And I did it as chief of department in FDNY when I used to go visit firehouses and sit down with the troops and talk to them, and I did a lot of it. I would go back to headquarters the next day, and I'd write them a thank you note. And handwriting. I didn't type it, I wrote it. And I said, appreciate the time with you all yesterday, blah, 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 blah. You don't know how many times people would tell me, Chief, that thing's still hanging on the wall in the bulletin board.
Wow.
Oh,
that's
yeah, that's
amazing.
awesome.
So when I was chief of the volunteers, I tried to do that a lot more. It's hard because you're working, you take care of your family, you're doing the firehouse. But if I thought of it, somebody did a good job, maybe doing fire prevention classes or whatever it was, and even at a fire or emergency, other than the annual awards dinner, I would send the folks and hey man, you guys did a great job at that fire. I'm telling you, that goes such a long way. You can't even measure it. Like it really is one of those things that you can't measure, but it goes. You can't put a price on it. But a simple thank you, especially in the volunteer business, man.
Yeah, that's something I never heard of before, and that's definitely. I mean, I would feel probably the same way if somebody,
Took
sent
the
me a
time
note.
to do it.
Yeah. And that was, one of the things I wanted to, and this actually one of my last questions on the leadership thing, and you kind of talked about it before, but being in a top leadership position, how do you show members that they can talk to you like an equal? Like, what's the best way to build trust? And you'd mentioned before, during COVID, you learned a lot by, being on these Zoom meetings with all these guys, or, visiting the firehouses and stuff like that. I feel sometimes, you could be in any firehouse, the chief walks in, and sometimes it might feel like there's some sort of like orb around them where the mood changes a little bit, and not necessarily in a negative way. It could be, or people are just, oh, the chief's here, like, how do you build that trust with the membership to show them, hey, I could talk to you like an equal. Yes, I'm the chief or I'm an officer, but we could talk here.
Can I ask you one thing?
Go ahead.
Because he did something that I was so amazed with when you were the chief of training. I invited you to Firehouse, and I don't mean to cut you off, but it just goes right into this topic, and I was going to just ask it before you said it. He came to the Firehouse, we invited him, and he sat at the kitchen table with the brothers, and he just looked over and he says, "What's your name, brother?" And he says, "John." And he goes, "Let me ask you, what do you think some of the problems are on the fire ground, and where do you think we should be going with training?" And like they were like looking at me like, should I answer this question?
remember you
I think
saying
I
this
talked
story.
to you about
Yeah,
this,
you
right?
did.
And it was amazing, like because I thought they were like a little uncomfortable, to like talking to him, and you're like, you could tell him freely. He's asking a question, and when he was asking a question, he asked a bunch of the brothers at the table, and I said, I've never seen a chief come to a firehouse and ask what your opinion was of issues or where we should be going with training. And next thing you know, he had focus groups. You started the
Yeah, we
focus
did that a
groups,
couple
like
times,
25
yeah.
at a time.
Yeah.
And one of my guys was picked. And, I remember when you left that day, and I went upstairs and I said, wow, it was so impressive. You talked to them just like regular
You know who I
firefighters.
learned that from? Tom Galvin.
Unbelievable.
Tom Galvin was the chief of training for a long time, post 9/11. Probably one of the all-stars in the FDNY. And he used to do that all the time. He used to call me on the phone when I was in the battalion, like midnight. I'm getting a call. It's the chief of training calling me, and he'd be asking me a question. Or he said, I'm going to send you an email. Let me know what you think. But I learned that from him.
Yeah, he did a lot of that.
He did a lot of that. And then they started, him and Jack Mooney started that whole thing at the Rock when they would
Right.
come down. The
Yeah,
staff
come and
chiefs would
speak
come
to
and
everybody,
talk to the
yes.
chief. They started all of that, and I always remembered that. And I said, that's important. It's important.
I thought you were great
It's
with
important.
that. Like you're talking about, you were a firefighter, and you were talking to them like firefighters, like just like, hey, what's going on? Let's talk at the table, like nonchalant, and
You know what I found
I give it
interesting
a lot
too?
of credit
When
to
you
that.
go into a firehouse, like in the city, guys want to talk about fires. Mm-hmm. They don't want to talk about overtime nonsense and like. So even when I was a battalion chief, I would go in the firehouse and I would always talk about fires first. That was my first thing. Let's talk about the job the other day, or whatever, or a job maybe in the Bronx I saw or heard about, and whatever. And then at the end, if I had to get into the stupid mutual discussion, like, all right, listen, guys, we got to tighten this up a little bit. And it was much better received because they said, this guy, this is not his top priority.
right.
His top priority is making sure we know what the hell we're doing and go to a fire. In the volunteer fire department, this is what I think, to your question, is important. In the volunteer fire department, visibility is huge, as a chief in particular. So, like, we get a call, whatever it is. I think it's important. A lot of times, especially in these days today, the chiefs, they're young, they're so busy, they got young families and stuff like that. But I used to say, you got to go back to the firehouse after the call. Not every call, but like say you had a call and you had a pretty good turnout. Maybe it turned out to be food on the stove or whatever it was. But you got a couple of rigs out, and go back to the firehouse and talk to them. Go have a cup of coffee. When I used to spend, my wife used to say, you went on a call like 1 o'clock in the morning, it's 5. But I used to go back to the firehouse and sit, and we used to drink coffee, and we used to talk.
Right.
Like, we would just talk all night long, honestly, about fires and other things, but the chiefs and the volunteer, if you want people to be able to approach you more comfortably, you got to be visible. You got to be there. A lot of chiefs, they make chief, they get the nice car, they go to the calls, they go home. And the only time you see them is at a department meeting or a company meeting or at the call, like, at the scene. They got to go back to the firehouse and sit and talk with the troops, man. Let them know you're one of them.
Yeah.
Hey, man, I got out of bed too. Let's go back to the firehouse. And, and we always did that after a job. Like, you get a fire, of course, we all go back and we critique. But even after the routine calls, a lot of times, if I knew I had a lot of people, I'd go back and I'd sit and have a cup of coffee with them just to say I'm here. Like, hey, what do you got? Like, I think visibility is big. And honestly, and I know, the guys that are most visible, the people that are most visible, are the people that get elected a lot. Like, right? Because they're good politicians.
Exactly.
But like, you got to be visible, and you got to let them know you actually care about them, and you appreciate the fact that they got up at 2 o'clock in the morning for a stupid automatic alarm or whatever stupid call it was, CO emergency, and I think that's missing a little bit in the volunteer service now. I don't think a lot of chiefs do that. I think they kind of, I don't know what your experience is in your departments, but I know a couple of our guys are really good at it. But I think it's important. I think it's really important to let them know that you care. That they got up in the middle of the night, or when we were running the ambulance as volunteers, we're pretty much all paid now. Guy going on an ambulance call 8 o'clock in the morning, you were on the ambulance for 4 hours.
Right.
Exactly. One after another, and like that person was getting beat up, but
That's tough.
just simply say thank you to them, man, and appreciate that.
It's funny you talk about visibility because you brought that up a couple episodes ago
Yeah.
about, you had a crew to go to a arch detail.
We had an arch detail, and I forget the details exactly. I think I wasn't able to make it at first, and they ended up getting a crew together, and then I ended up being able to go, but I had a choice to make. I could have went 2 ways. Oh, they got a crew. I'm captain. They got a crew. They can get it done. They don't need me. Go ahead. They don't need me there. Or I can just show up anyway. And I made the decision to come anyway. I didn't have to do anything. Obviously, I had the chauffeur, full crew. Everyone was there to do everything that needed to be done. And I ended up needing to leave a little bit early. But the perception of me being there for the new guys that were there, and
huge.
then the chauffeur that was there, and just I was another set of hands. It wasn't as much like the workload. It was just an arch detail. There was another truck full of guys there, but just showing up and being the officer that's around.
That's right.
And my captain showed up.
Yes.
He's there, and we didn't need him there, but he was there. So I think that's important. I try and do that as much as I can.
One of my old famous lines too with people is, "Get dirty with the troops, man." Like when they're drilling, they're doing a drill. They're in the we're
your gear
lucky.
on.
We have a burn building, and we're able to drill all the time, especially now that the weather's going to break. I used to tell all my assistant chiefs, like, dude, when they're drilling and they're doing search or they're doing, get in there.
Yep.
Do it with them. You're still going to have to do this, in a fire. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Get dirty with the troops, I used to say. Get dirty with them, and they will appreciate it, and they won't be afraid of you. Like, they're going to say, man, this guy's crawling around right next to me. Like,
We've spoke about that a
Yeah,
little
it was
bit.
actually one of our clips that went viral. Was talking about a couple of my chiefs that were geared up in line during a drill.
Yep.
With the guys, and then even I remember as a probie, we were going through a maze. It was my first time ever going through a maze, and my chief at the time, I had mentioned him before, Ray Germain was behind me.
Yeah.
And he's a city guy, but he was right behind me, and I'm a new guy. I've never been through the maze before, and I felt his hand on my bottle the entire time, and was just helping me go through, all things, but, fully geared up, and he's with a probie, and just being there, and I felt like I learned a ton just by going through that little maze.
And it built confidence.
It means a
Yeah.
lot.
Right?
It really means a lot.
Yeah, it does.
Be invisible, get dirty with them, and just treat them with respect. I think it's huge. And one of the successes I think that I had in FDNY is like, firehouse kitchens are tough in the volleys and in the city.
Yeah.
And I could always remember, especially when I was in the field, you're sitting around the kitchen and something would come down from headquarters and he goes, Christ, those guys have no idea what's going on, blah, blah, blah. So now by chance, now I'm one of those guys in headquarters. I says, I'm not going to be that guy, And when I was chief of department, I told my executive officer, I said, listen, every Friday, I don't want any meetings if I can help it, unless the commissioner tells me I got to be at something. I want my schedule clear on Friday. I'm going out to the field. So in the morning, I would go to an EMS station, and I would wear my golf shirt or sweatshirt, my BDUs, and I would go to the station. I'd bring a piece of cake, and I'd sit in the kitchen with the EMS people. And they do their shifts differently and everything. But I'd say to the station officer, I say, I want to go ride with somebody today. Who am I going with? And they'd say, what? You going on the ambulance? I said, yeah, I'm going to go ride in the ambulance. I was an EMT, so I was like, I know what I'm doing. I actually have a clue. So I went on the ambulance. And I did it mostly because I wanted to just talk to these kids and kind of see what was up. What are some of the things that you need help with? What are the challenges that you have? And because I was embarrassed to say I did not know enough about the EMS side of the house.
I was just going to say that, what do they call them sometimes? The forgotten.
Yeah. It's like the redheaded stepchild kind of act. And it was unfortunate because they're very, very busy.
Yeah.
They do a lot, as he knows. And so I'm telling you, it was the greatest experience. And I didn't make it every Friday, but most Fridays during my tenure. I do that in the morning, and in the afternoon, I would go to a firehouse because I knew I would get a good meal. And then I would go have lunch, and I would ride on the rig. I used to go, if it was an engine company that was a four-man engine, they had a spot so I could ride on the engine. Man, I had so much fun, but more importantly, I was there to listen to every complaint that they had, and I'm telling you, it made me a better chief. It made me a better firefighter, and I loved every single minute of it. It was so much fun, and it went a long way to credibility, to trust. I said, man, this guy's not a bad guy. Like, he's a regular guy. Like, you know what I mean? And people to this day will never forget that, Chief, that you came and you rode on the rig with us, man. It was awesome. The EMS guys, they were like, the chief of the department, they didn't even know who I was, some of them.
Right.
I would call ahead and say I was coming, so they knew the chief was coming, but a lot of them didn't know me, And my son was in EMS, at the time. He was on the job a couple of years. And my son would tell me, he says, man, Dad, the word's out. Chief of the department's riding on the ambulance. But I don't think anybody ever did that before, other than maybe back in the day when they started EMS, when Dan Nigro was the first chief of EMS. He might have been out riding. But I thought that was one of the greatest experiences I had, but it speaks to that visibility thing. It speaks to trust. It speaks to a whole bunch of stuff, just listening to people.
Right.
It's important, man. It's
I
really
think that
important.
works across like all sectors too, not just emergency services,
Oh,
but
absolutely.
regular business too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. When leadership's involved, I feel like it
What was
really
that
does
show
make
that
such a
they
difference.
had where it was like you dressed up, the boss would dress up? And
Oh, yeah.
Undercover
Undercover boss, right?
Right.
And, it got to
was a
be the
different
same
dynamic.
like story all the time or storyline. But, when it first started out, I was like, that's very impressive. Like, the boss goes out, the CEO of the company, and he goes and he rides somewhere undercover that people don't know who they are, and it's impressive because they see the inner workings of what really goes on to the people out there. And I think that's basically what you were doing with the fire department.
It was awesome, man. It was awesome. And, in the volunteer business too, just going back to the firehouse and sitting with them, drilling with them, getting dirty with them. And it's so easy. It's not hard to do, man. It's not hard. You just got to make the commitment to do it. Now, when you take those jobs and a volunteer chief, that's a lot of time, man. So you're away from your family enough as it is. So, I would go down on the drill days and the drill nights when we were drilling, and you get involved. You just want to do it. Plus, it was good practice.
So
it's fun.
As a chief,
fun, right.
did you go to every week you'd go to a different company to drill with?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
would you do them would you try to hit every company?
I tried to hit every borough. You're talking about in the
I was
city?
talking about the volunteer.
Oh,
but
no.
both is
So
fine.
in Deer Park, we're fortunate. Like, we only have one firehouse.
Yeah, we're
okay.
like
So
separate
we have
firewalls.
one firehouse. So everybody's in the same building. So we had our drill nights, so usually Wednesday nights or Sunday mornings. So it was on the calendar. And, I would try and be down there, particularly on those days and nights. when I wasn't working, and I tried to encourage the other chiefs, to do the same, and it definitely made a difference, 100%. Especially second time around chief's office, I learned so much from the first time. And the first time I was always like that too. I used to go back to the firehouse all the time after a call. Back then we didn't have the fingerprint thing. You had to go back and sign it. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
So, but that was probably one of the reasons why I went back. But you got back, and you were able to see the folks. But yeah, it was a good experience. It was the right thing to do.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And what was the reason you wound up running for chief the second time?
So the second time around was a little odd situation there. They had a situation with one of the chiefs, and they wanted somebody that could mentor the chiefs.
Okay.
One particular chief. So they said one of the board members was my good friend. He was on the job in the city too, and he said, "Hey, would you consider coming back as third assistant? We could use you, man. Like, we could use your help. We're struggling, And so I talked to my wife. She wasn't super thrilled about it, but
Again.
once again, she was awesome, man. She was a trooper, and she said, "Nah, man, if they're asking you, and if I would have said no, she would have been fine with it. But I said, you know what, man, they're asking me to help. I feel bad if I say no, so I did it, and it worked out. It all worked out. I think we were all better for it, and the board was happy. I think their intent was to bring some stability back to the chief's office maybe at the time. And the chiefs were good. They were good guys. They were all good guys. I knew them all. But that was the board asking me to get back involved, and I did. It was nice. It was very nice they asked me.
Yeah.
And I had a good experience. I had a great experience. I loved it. I loved every minute of it.
I actually saw a photo of you online, probably maybe going back like a year ago, and I think it's when you were chief in the city, and it's someone who posted a picture, and it said, "Chief of the FDNY getting at it in the volley world."
So that was probably a long time, more than a year ago, because
It was longer?
I stopped responding in Deer Park when I was chief of operations, and I'll tell you why. I was at a fire, and I was cutting a roll-down gate. I think I was chief of training, and it was right before I became chief of operations. And your name's on the coat, so of course the picture was in Fire News or something. I'm getting phone calls, and the fire commissioner passed a remark at some whatever meeting or whatever, and I said, you know what, it's probably not a good look for a staff chief to be running around in a volunteer fire department, just for a lot of reasons. But the unions and all that stuff. It's in New York City, it's like the unions have never made a really big deal about guys being volunteers. Years ago, it was more taboo, but all the years I was on the job, I was a volunteer. I never had a problem. Other parts of the country, that's not true. Other parts of the state, it's not true. I had a friend who was in the Yonkers Fire Department. He was still a volley in Deer Park, and they found out, and the union came to him and said, "Listen, it's over, bro. That's it.
Really?
Wow.
It's over." And that was the end of him. He was done. And he couldn't be a volley anymore. And he was great. He was awesome. But he's still on the job in Yonkers, in fact.
Every once in a while, our union would step in
Yeah, a
for
little
certain
bit.
things.
But that time, and then I said to myself, I even said to my wife, I said, "Yeah, I probably should stop, right now, because."
Oh, really? My perception was, oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
From your side, but not from the other side.
But like when the commissioner, he didn't do it directly either. Like he did it like indirectly. He was, Commissioner Nigro had a good wit about him. Like, and he said something, and I was like, I think I know what he's talking about. And I probably should stop. And then I became chief operations. I said, I can't do it anymore. I have to
slow
stop.
down.
So what is the major problem with that? Just because of potential injury or something
Well,
like that?
potential injury, of course, but more, I think, optics. The optics of it. You know what I mean?
If you can do it for free, why do we have paid people? Stuff
And
like
I'm
that.
at the time I was the number 2 guy in the fire department.
Right.
Right. So the optics of that, operating as a volunteer firefighter and being in the top leadership position in the largest fire department in the country, probably not a good look, So I think that was the reason. But I'll tell you what, I was a commissioner. I was on the board at the time. I got on the board in 2016. So I was still a deputy chief.
Yep.
And when I said, I'm not going to quit the board. The board's the board. Like, you know, I'm an
You could be a
administrator. I'm
you
an
could be a
administrator.
civilian
Yeah,
and-
Yeah, you know what I mean? So I stayed on the board, you know. I didn't leave the board. But, and I told, a couple of times I break his chops. I said, you know, I'm a commissioner too, you know.
He probably laughed at you.
That's actually pretty. Because it's funny, you know. After we started this, and we were walking around the Buff Show with Kevin, and we met a couple of FDNY, you know, chiefs over there, and even on the Getting Salty cruise, and I've always, and you know, Phil and I have talked about this. We've always had a perception that city guys absolutely hate us, and then we were talking to these guys that are, you know, higher up in the city fire department, and they're like, "Oh, you guys are volleys out here," and talking to us like regular firemen.
That's right.
And it kind
We're
of
all
changed.
firemen.
Yeah, and it's changed like the whole perception, because it was like, you know, everything I've known coming up through the volunteer fire department is like, you know, city guys hate you. Don't talk fire.
You
with
know
them.
when it changed, really? After 9/11. After 9/11, a lot of people that were city firefighters had a newfound respect for the volunteer fire service because of what they did for us
Stepping
with
up.
the funerals and the collations. And, you know, I think the relationship was good before that for the most part. But after 9/11, it changed dramatically, dramatically, right? And because the volunteers did step up,
Yep.
you know, big time.
T-shirts,
big time.
everything
huge,
else, and
huge,
everything.
huge.
They were
Yeah.
out there for every funeral.
You know, and I remember, you know, there were guys that I worked with. Most of the guys over the years, they were city guys. They lived in the city and grew up in the city. They had no clue about the volunteers. But then there were guys that lived on the island or lived in upstate, and they'd be bashing the volleys. And so I used to say to them, I says, "Let me ask you a question." And I said, "What's up?" I says, "Where do you live?" So I tell me, I says, "So your wife home tonight and your kids?" "Yeah." I says, "So God forbid there's a fire in your house, bro. Who's coming?"
Yeah.
"The volunteers, bro." I says, "So, you know
It's-
what I mean?"
The ones you're bad mouthing right now.
Not
this
good.
Is, I
got some
heard
good
this-
jokes.
I heard this.
We got some good
I heard
jokes
this
about that.
comedian one
Gonna
time.
piss Kevin off.
Yeah, I heard
Oh
this,
boy,
this
here we
comedian.
go.
It was a really funny joke, and I forget his name, but he's on the stage and he's like, you know, he's like, "What's the beef between, you know, the volunteer firefighters and the paid guys?" He's like, "Is it because the volunteer guys can go to the paid guys and be like, 'Hey, I could do your entire job in my spare time'?"
Oh God. Yeah, that's not
Oh
nice.
my God.
It's not nice.
I mean, he was a
Oh,
comedian,
man.
you know,
Yeah.
know.
Pretty funny.
But it was
That's
just a
awesome.
funny joke, and
Yeah,
you know,
it
that
is.
whole
It's-
thing
yeah.
reminded me of it.
Right.
It happens.
But, you know, the fact of the matter is, you said it before, I think 70 or 75% of the firefighters in this country
Yeah,
is
70%, yeah.
There's 1 million firefighters in this country. I think 700 or almost 800,000 of them are volunteers.
Right? Yeah.
You know, that's a fact, and it's largely a financial thing in many communities, right? But we're very fortunate here on Long Island. The equipment that we have, the facilities that we have,
Oh, it's amazing.
we are very, very, very blessed. There's very few fire departments. You know, some of the East End departments that don't have a lot of money, just by virtue of the fact that they don't have large populations or large industry and stuff. They don't have the money, and they survive. You know, and I'm telling you, I don't know about you. When I was teaching at the fire academy, I loved going out east. Go to some of these small departments. They were old school.
Old school, yeah.
Old school volunteer departments. They were so nice. You go there, they'd be cooking a meal sometimes. And, "Hey, Chief, you want to eat?" Because they would cook on drill night, some of them, you know. But they always were so respectful. And you could see, like, they didn't have the resources that some of us have in other parts of the county, you know. And they were very appreciative and very, very attentive, and they were always wanted to learn more. And there was no better than that as an instructor, right?
Yeah,
To go to
absolutely.
a place like that and see that you're making a difference, like, right? And they really appreciated it. So you always tried to give a little extra, like, you know what I mean? And I loved going out there. I really, really did.
Yeah, I went out to Amagansett Fire Department one time. I was working, you know, selling fire equipment, and bought out some rescue tools for them. And I remember pulling up there, and they have a huge plot of land. And I'm like, "All right, where are we going with these tools?" And they're like, "Yeah, we're going in this back field or whatever." And they got like backhoes and stuff like that they're slamming these junk cars into each other with. And I'm like, "This is awesome."
To make it realistic.
Yeah, and I mean, they had a competitive
Extrication team.
extrication team.
Yeah,
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 And
yeah.
it was like I had a
Yeah.
blast watching those
Yeah.
guys cut up the
Yep,
car and
yep.
checking out these new tools. And then same deal, invited me right into the firehouse. After, hey, we got pizza.
Great guys, man.
Yeah,
Great people, and they're real like tight community
Yeah.
people. Like, you know what I mean? And I thought that was really special. You know.
I felt bad one time because I was on the way out to teach a class, and I'm like, oh, I better eat something. I stopped, grabbed 2 slices of pizza, Coke, and I pull up, and then they get this whole spread of food out, and they're like, oh, Chief, you got to sit down and eat. I'm like,
like
I just had
lobster
2
tail.
slices. Yeah, like everything, like and
Oh,
I'm like, I
great.
felt bad, and I'm like, they're like, listen, anytime you teach it, you just come out early. There's food here every time. I'm like, I didn't know.
My wife used to say to me, so let's say, the extreme, I got a class in Montauk tonight. So for me to go to Montauk to teach a class, the class usually starts 7:30. I left my house at 4 o'clock
Right.
It's a long ride.
because of the traffic. So I'd leave at 4 o'clock, get out there. It would take me an hour and a half to get there. So I'm there early. I would get something to eat maybe. You go teach the class. And the class was over at 9:30ish. I wasn't home till 11 o'clock. So I said, my wife said, so let me get this straight. She goes,
How about you getting paid?
I was getting paid 1 session, and she goes, you're out of your freaking mind, we got paid mileage for gas and all of that too, but I said, no, man, I says, it's for the love of the job,
That's
honestly.
it.
I love doing it. And and when you went out there, they were so appreciative that I didn't even care. Like,
right.
I just liked doing it.
Yeah,
like,
you
I'm
like
sure a
doing it.
lot of us are like that.
That's why we do it.
Right.
That's why you do it. And honestly, being an instructor makes you a better firefighter.
Absolutely.
I really believe that.
Yeah.
100%.
Teaching.
Makes you a
it
better
better.
firefighter. It does.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's good stuff.
Well,
I got one thing,
Oh,
one
yeah,
more
go
thing,
ahead.
if you don't mind.
No,
but,
not at all.
could you just talk about? I think some people really don't understand the responsibility you have as a chief officer, and it's just one thing that if I've always tried to bring it out to people is like when you sit in that front right seat, or you're a chauffeur in the rig, or you're a chief officer, you're taking a lot of responsibility for the people that you have operating, and also wherever you're responding, the home, the people there, or the building. And I think a lot of people don't understand. They go and get elected, and they don't understand that responsibility they really have. And if you could just kind of surmise a little bit of
Sure.
that responsibility and how important it is.
So I think what I'll do is I'll tell it to you as a story. How's that?
Okay.
So I'll start with the story I had in the FDNY. I made battalion chief in 2000. I was on the job 20 years, just about. Was a chief for quite some time. And in 2008, I had a fire. And as a chief, all of us subconsciously say, I hope nobody ever gets really badly hurt or killed on my watch. Well, 2008, I'm chief. I go to a fire in a high-rise multiple dwelling in Brooklyn, in what they call the Ebbets Field complex, where the old Brooklyn Dodgers used to play. It's big high-rise buildings. And long story short, one of my lieutenants died. First New Engine Company. His name was John Monson. So now, I had been a chief for 8 years. Thought I was on my game, you know what I mean? And when I said to you before about how humbling this job is, I was devastated, man. This guy died, man. His wife, they had a 2-year-old, and she was like 8 months pregnant with the second one. And so this is 2008, January 3rd. So it's a long time ago. I'll never forget that. Worst day of my career. However, at the time, I was a chief in the volleys. I was a first assistant chief. Had a few fires. I become chief of department again in 2009. 2010, my mother passes away in January of 2010. And the day of her funeral, we had the collation back at the firehouse, luncheon or whatever, and we're all there. My brothers are there. My brothers are banging away, my sisters, and I'm not drinking because I got the chief's call. I'm not drinking, man. I'm not going to drink. And we're at the bar in the firehouse. One of the old timers, one of my favorites, who just passed away not long ago, this guy Mike Carucci, and he knew my father and my mother very well, over the years. And we the tones go off, and reported structure fire, and a couple blocks from the firehouse, like pretty close. It's freezing cold. It's January 10th. My mother got buried that day. My father was already gone. I get there first, and it's a good job, like a really good job. And I'm like, oh my God. So we got out pretty quick. The engine got out pretty quick, and we got a pretty good job. And now we're going, it was a house. It was 2 stories. It was like, started on the outside of the house, got in. So it turns out the fire was showing on the first floor. Turned out there was fire in the basement. And it was a little while before we got a line down there. The first line went in the front door. They were knocking down the fire on the first floor. But it turned out there was fire in the basement. And so we got a line around the rear. There was an outside entrance. And they short-stretched. And they couldn't get, they didn't make where the room was on fire down the basement. Fire gets up into the second floor, right through the soffits. It's roaring up there. One of my assistant chiefs goes up. Things start to hit, shit the bed a little bit. You know what I mean? Now, at some point, I said, you know what? I'm just getting everybody out. We got to regroup here, man. This is not going well. So I get up on the front stoop and I'm telling the guys with the line, back the line out. I'm calling the chief upstairs, get everybody out. Just bring everybody out. We got to start over. Like, this is not going good. And we had a lot of guys there. So get everybody out, and I'm doing a roll call. I say to you got all you guys? Got all you guys? We got mutual aid there. You got all you guys? Mutual aid guys, I think so. I'm like, really?
I think so.
Safety officers didn't have all the tags, all of that. So it was chaos. Sure enough, somebody says, so-and-so's missing. I'm like, holy shit. My heart was in my throat. I had a guy die a couple of years before. Now I'm at this fire in the Volleys, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, I can't believe this, right? Finally, we found him. He was at the rig, He was at the rig. Everybody was out. So we started over. We lost. We had to go to. It was ugly, man. It was just a bad.
It's a
fight.
parking lot again.
It was bad. So we lost it. It was actually one of those things like we actually used a tower ladder on a private dwelling. I was beside myself because in my whole time as a chief there, we never had to do that.
Right.
But whatever happened. The floor collapsed on the first floor. It was bad. So anyway, the point about responsibility, like in the volunteer system, a lot of times guys, they run and they're elected, right? And sometimes, let's be honest with each other, sometimes we elect maybe not the greatest sometimes.
It's a popularity contest.
That's the way it works, man. It's just the way it works. It's no disrespect to anybody.
Nope.
It's just the system. If you're not prepared for it, and that's the key word, preparation. If you want to be a chief officer in any department, paid or volunteer, it doesn't matter. You have to be prepared. Now, we're fortunate in New York City. We have a lot of training. And if you had a kind of a career where you worked in active places and you went to a lot of fires and you learned by experience, sometimes in the volunteers we don't get a lot of fires. So you got to make sure that you train more. That's all. You got to be more prepared. And it's nice to have the pretty little car with all the stuff. I love being the chief, man. I love being there first because I used to jump and get my can and run in the building. You know what I mean?
I'm the same way.
Pissed,
First guy through the door.
Say that again. Say that again.
It's a huge responsibility, man.
It is
You are responsible for everybody there. If you're the incident commander, you are responsible no matter what. Paid, career, volunteer, doesn't matter. My first fire as a battalion chief, I didn't act as a battalion chief only a couple of times, but my first real fire as a battalion chief was I was a battalion chief. And I'll never forget being at the fire. Like, I've been to a lot of fires now, but now I'm a chief. I was at this fire, and again, it was in the exposure. It was a frame building. And I'm like, oh my God. I felt the weight on my shoulders like never before. Now, as time goes on, you get a little more comfortable. You have a routine, and fortunately, when you have good people working around you, and that's the key too. Like I always found in the volunteer firehouse, like you could listen to the radio. You could attest to this. You're on the scene, you transmit a working fire, you go do your thing, and then you hear the first apparatus go on the road, and you hear the voice. And I'm like, holy shit, man, this is not going to be good. You know what I mean? Like I don't. Right? Now, it's not the one officer maybe that you're looking for, or acting officer, whatever. And then other times, it was like, all right, man, I got the A-team coming, like, you know what I mean? And again, no disrespect, it's just the way it is. And, if it wasn't the A team, well, maybe you got to get involved a little more than you normally would, right? Or maybe, as you guys probably notice, when you go to a fire, a lot of times, if there's a couple of key people there, like key experienced people, the job's going to get done.
Yep.
It's going to get done, and thankfully for that. So, in a career service, these guys are working. And I always worked in the areas that were pretty active, so I had motivated people, man. And I'm so happy now in my department in Deer Park. We just had a whole influx of brand new young kids. They're 17 and 18 years old. I remember when I was that age. They're so into it, but they got to learn.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of them, but we got to teach them. And we have great guys doing our training, really good. And so they're trained properly. But it's going to take them some time to get experience, right? That's what it does. It takes time. So, going back to that experience, that responsibility question, man, I can't even overemphasize it, man. I had a tragedy as a chief officer in a career department with great people, man. It happened, and it can happen. It can happen to you. It can happen. Knock on wood, I hope it doesn't. But at that fire in Deer Park that night, I swear to God, I was like, I can't believe this is happening to me again. Yep. This is insane, But thankfully, it all worked out. But take it serious, train, prepare, train more, prepare more, go to as many drills, go to Yaphank as many times as you can, and play the part. All this computer simulation software programs now that we have.
Yep.
And you could build fires, and take pictures of buildings in your district. Sims you share, I think they use at the Fire Academy. There's a whole bunch of them. And just drill, practice, and make believe you're the chief and put fire up there and talk about it. There's so many ways to do it, but there's nothing like actually doing it, though, right? No matter what.
Right, yeah.
Whether it's nozzle, whether it's being a roof firefighter, being a cannon or a force fire, you got to do it.
Yep.
But the less fires that you go to require more training.
Absolutely.
It's like an inverse relationship, if you will. It is. And one thing that'll kill you in this business is complacency. Complacency will kill you. And if you're not going to fires on a regular basis, I don't care who you are, even in the city, a lot of times when we were having a slow period of time, I hadn't gone to a fire in a couple of months, I found like I wasn't on my game as much. I was rusty, and you could tell. But you know what always saved me was the company officers. The firefighters, the people that are doing the job. They made you look good.
Yep.
Right.
Same thing in the volunteers. If you had a good crew, man, they made you look like an all-star. But you got to understand that it is, no matter what, it's your responsibility as the chief, particularly as the incident commander. You got it. So think about that, like before you take the job, before you run for the position. I was a captain in FDNY when I made assistant chief. So I felt like I had some experience, you know what I mean? I felt a little more comfortable doing it. But I give people a lot of credit that step up today to be chief officers in the volunteer system that they work other jobs, man. I don't know how they do it, honestly and truthfully. Guys that work 9 to 5, 5 days a week, have a family, and try to stay up on your game. It's hard, man. It's really hard. But I think people should be honest with. I think you gotta be honest with yourself.
You do. You have to look in the mirror every
You
once in
gotta
a while.
be honest
and
with
say,
yourself.
What
Am
am
I
doing?
really cut out for this?
Yep.
It's just a fact of life. You got to be prepared for it if you're going to do it. Eddie Kilduff, chief of department in FDNY, used to say at promotion ceremonies, you got to show up and step up. So if you're going to be a chief in the volunteer fire department, you got to show up, be visible, and you got to step up and do what you have to do to be as good as you can be the best chief you can be. And that's like simple advice. It's harder. It's easier said than done. Let's put it that way, right?
Right.
So that's my spiel on that.
Awesome.
I think
Well,
that's a
Chief,
great way to
this
close
is-
it out.
This has been fantastic. I think there's a ton of information in here for our viewers. And again, we really appreciate you coming on and sharing your experience and, giving some real good tips about leadership and, just being a firefighter in general. So
I appreciate it.
really appreciate
No,
you
my
guys
pleasure,
having
man.
on.
I love doing stuff like this. I like to try and think I could pass some of it on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Very well spoken too.
Yeah.
I can tell you've held these positions.
Yeah,
He's not lying. To us.
I used to tell people I'm not as dumb as I look. You know what I mean? It's like I tell my son now, you're not as dumb as you look. But yeah, no. And I'm kind of rejuvenated now that my kid's coming on the job.
It's awesome.
You know, that he's going to be in the firehouse soon. I'm like, I can't believe it. Like, I mean, it's just going to be cool.
He's
that
going to
is
say,
awesome.
Dad, you want to ride with me?
Yeah, you want to
Come
ride
on.
with me?
Yeah.
No, it's all good.
awesome.
But thank you for having me.
Yeah,
It's my
absolutely.
pleasure. And
Anytime.
I wish you really good luck with this, because this is a good forum, particularly for the volunteer fire service. And you, Kevin knows, and you guys, there's so many good people out there that you can bring on the show.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely, yeah.
that have a lot to offer. There's a lot of great people in the volunteer business, man, a lot.
Yep.
And so it'll be good to hear from others and pass the word on and make the volunteer fire department as best as it could be, because, you know, as you all know, man, we're struggling.
We're
right?
struggling.
We're all
Yeah.
struggling.
That's what we're hoping for.
That's
we're
the
hoping
plan.
to, pass on and share a lot of information, and other people in other departments can hear how other places operate,
That's right.
and maybe we can all grow and
good.
make ourselves better.
Well, good luck to you guys. I
Thank
wish you
you.
the best.
Thank you very
God
much,
bless.
Chief.
Thank you.
And a big shout out, Kyle Cook
Yeah,
behind
Kyle
the
Cook.
lens
Cook.
today,
My man.
Awesome.
helping us out.
Awesome.
That's a wrap. Episode
wrap.
11. Ex-Chief Tom Richardson.
Thank you, brothers. Appreciate that.